Going to be a little bit of a rainy/snowy week as we have welcomed in the month of March. But as it is, every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic. Porter Larson behind the glass today, producing the program. Happy Monday to you. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. Jam-packed weekend in the world of local and, of course, national sports. We got a lot to do on this Monday afternoon after a nice little springtime type week, I should say, weather-wise last week. A little chilly, a little colder this week, but it is still early March. So hopefully you had a fun weekend. Got outside, enjoyed the weather. It was a nice 62-degree Sunday afternoon. And on the program today, we will review the weekend that was in the world of both college and pro basketball. The Ides of March is upon us. BYU continues to stay hot. The Utah men were able to get a win, and the Utah women beat BYU here in Salt Lake via a half-court heave. An incredible moment. And now we are on to conference tournament time on the women's side. The Utes will be the number 6 seed in the Big 12. BYU comes in at number 12, Big 12 tournament style. BYU was able to beat West Virginia on Saturday night at the Marriott Center. Now they've got a big game coming up tomorrow in Ames against Iowa State. They win that game, they'll probably get the one of the top 4 seeds in the Big 12 tournament, which leads to a double bye into the quarterfinals. Final game of the regular season for both Utah and BYU men's hoops will be against each other down in Provo on March the 8th. University of Utah men welcome in West Virginia coming up tomorrow night. Head on up to the Huntsman Center and say thank you to these young men who have had a very emotional couple of weeks. We'll get to the latest with the head coaching hire and the potential candidates and where we're at right now with the Utah men's basketball program. Good piece up in the Salt Lake Tribune. Jason Patacchio, a couple of good pieces on Utah men's hoops. Talked to Gabe Madsen about how he found out the news that Coach Smith had been let go. Really cool piece on Ezra Asar and his background, his family, and getting to know him a little bit better. So go to sltrib.com for all the latest. Spring football is upon us down in Provo. Not quite yet here, but obviously college football topical right now. So we'll get the latest college football storylines. We had a bunch of local boys at the Combine show out. We'll kind of give you an update in that direction. Some NFL news. T. Higgins has been franchised for a second straight year, and we are high speed ahead to the NFL draft. So we'll get to all the latest as far as the pro football and college football news. Real Salt Lake with a breath of, I should say, a sigh of relief for a fan base that was a little bit nervous after a rough start. RSL was able to win their home opener against Seattle at America First Field. We'll do a little soccer on the program today. The Utah Hockey Club lost to the Devils. They're back in action on Thursday against Detroit. Points at a premium as the wild card still a very legitimate possibility. So a lot to do on the radio show today. Thanks for being a part of it. We're going to start off with Tom Haberstroh, NBA Daily Assist style. Jazz lost to the Pelicans, thank goodness, over the weekend. Jazz welcome in the red-hot Detroit Pistons. When's the last time you were able to say a sentence like the red-hot Detroit Pistons? 1988? Not sure. But the Pistons are in town. Old buddy Dennis Lindsay is part of the Pistons front office. So Jazz in action tonight, kind of the only local product in action. All the college hoops will take place tomorrow, and then the Utah Hockey Club out off for a bit. So Tom Haberstroh, our first guest right out of the gates. We'll do a little RSL with Dunny. The birthday boy himself, Brian Dunseth, rolls by. The voice of the Utes, Bill Riley, is our guest in the 4 o'clock hour. And then Sam Monson stops by. Do a little football with Sam. Always an entertaining, fun guest. Excited to catch up with Sam today. We'll do some NFL drafts, some NFL Combine. And with Riles, we'll do a little Utes football and some basketball, of course, and a busy, busy Monday show to get your week started out the right way. Tom Haberstroh, Brian Dunseth, Bill Riley, Sam Monson, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. And that guy who, like me, did not see any of the Oscar-nominated movies.
None?
I went 0 for 10, man.
Wow.
By the way, when did we start nominating 10? I call them films. It's not a big deal.
Right.
When did we start nominating 10 films for this award?
I like to call them cinematic adventures.
Ooh, nice. One-upper in there.
I don't know about when they or how much they nominate. I've never been like an award show guy. We've talked about this, but I expected you to see at least some of those movies. It's kind of in my wheelhouse to see them 2 years later once they arrive on streaming. But no, I thought you would. You'd be all over it. Maybe we'll have to get our guy Brady on the line.
The Movie Zone. Shout out to Brady. No, I feel like the only people that have seen more than like 2 or 3 of these films, again, let's keep it above board here,
Thank you.
nominated for the award are people in miserable relationships that don't want to talk to each other, so they just go to a movie. If you're single, you're not going to see these movies.
You're like going and doing stuff where you're, interacting.
Where you don't feel like you need to escape from your life.
Okay.
I'll just put it like that.
I think, maybe not everybody who's a movie buff, but there's probably something there.
No, I think most people. It's like Disney adults. We'll get to it later on. But our first guest is going to be Tom Haberstroh. But before we get to Tom, courtesy of our good friends over at Prize Picks on a Monday afternoon, it is time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
Second half of the basketball season is here, and the race to the playoffs is heating up on Prize Picks, the best place to get cash on all your favorite sports. Don't miss your chance to cash in as the league's best fight for playoff positioning. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and, of course, Utah. The app is really easy to use. To create a lineup, all you have to do is pick more or less on a few player stats for your shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. Prize Picks, best place to win cash while watching sports. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Use the promo code ESPN700 at checkout when you download the Prize Picks app, and you get $50 instantly when you just play $5. Don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. All right, so recap real quick the basketball action over the weekend. And, ultimately, we're still kind of waiting to hear more information on the situation with the head coaching job for the University of Utah on the men's side of things. But they were able to get a win over Arizona State. And you just kind of felt happy for this group of young men who clearly have been through a very emotional roller coaster. As I referenced at the top of the show, our buddy Jason Patacchio from the Salt Lake Tribune wrote a good piece on the player reaction to Craig losing his job. Where were you when you heard? What kind of were your thoughts afterwards? And Gabe Madsen and some others were interviewed. Really cool piece on Ezra Asar. Ezra was really good against a depleted Arizona State team that essentially had 5 scholarship players and played 6 players. Even Bobby Hurley's kid got 8 minutes. I'm hearing a lot of rumors and rumblings around the Arizona State men's basketball program that they're going to get rid of Bobby Hurley, with what Kenny Dillingham has done on the football side of things. Arizona State's I've always believed, kind of like a sleeping giant. They should be better in both basketball and football consistently than they have been. But a cool moment for the Utes as Brady Smith got in the game, Craig's son, had an and one opportunity. And Brady's a really good free throw shooter. So when I saw it, I'm like, he's going to knock down the free throw. But unfortunately, he missed it. He had a big smile on his face. And it just kind of made you feel good, right, for a program that's been through a bunch. So they were able to get a win against Arizona State. Obviously, we're kind of waiting to hear, like I said, more information on the situation with the head coaching job. I was happy for that group, though. Happy for Coach Eilert, Josh Eilert, to get a win. And now, look, the Ides of March in college basketball has taught all of us that you never know what could happen. The program is escaping me, but there was a coach last year that was informed that he was going to lose his job, and he went on to win his conference tournament and went to the NCAA tournament, right? So, look, I'm not going to sit here and predict that Utah is going to run through the Big 12 bracket. We've got West Virginia here in Salt Lake coming up tomorrow, the final home opportunity for these young men to play in front of fans at the Huntsman Center. It was Long Beach State. Okay, so the Long Beach State head coach was told he was fired. They went on to win their conference tournament, then advanced to the NCAA tournament, right?
Yeah, Don Monson, I think, was the head coach. I wonder how often that's happened, but we're in a space where it's more of a possibility than I think probably ever before. Yeah,
like I said, I'm not predicting it, and part of me feels like that game at BYU coming up on March the 8th could get really, really ugly because BYU is playing some really high-quality basketball right now. All of the signs and everything that I've heard and the people I've talked to seem to indicate that Alex Jensen is the top candidate. And as I was able to report last week, based off of 2 different sources, Alex is in the final year of his contract as the assistant coach for the Dallas Mavericks. Is that germane to the situation? Not entirely sure. How far have these conversations gone? I've heard that they have met. They have talked to each other. Apparently, according to a couple of reports, there was a meeting in Los Angeles with Alex Jensen. Not sure if Andre Miller has been contacted about being an assistant just yet. But whoever it is going to be building this thing from the ground up. And if any news breaks, of course, we will bring it to you. And as we've discussed and will continue to discuss, regardless of who the candidate is, they're all going to be asking the same question. If it's Alex Jensen, if it's Andre Miller, if it's Richard Pitino, if it's Bryce Drew, they're going to look at Mark Harlan and Taylor Randall and say, what are the economics of your program right now? What does it look like? Are we keeping up with the ability to pay players what we need to pay them in order to get them to come here? Love it or hate it, man, that's where we're at. So no tangible news in that space over the weekend, but happy for the Utes to get that win. Happy ultimately for Coach Eilert and those players to experience a win, and we'll see what they do the rest of the way. The best game of the weekend was the Utah women's game against BYU. Now, BYU has this rising star, this freshman, this Delaney Gibb freshman, went for 36, 10, and 5. She was 13 of 18 from the floor, 5 of 7 from 3. And you know, of course, the attention is on the half-court shot. Maddie Wilkie hit there at the end. It was her only 3 of the game. But it really was Yana on a couple of different occasions. Yana Neepkins tied the game in regulation with a big-time 3 after BYU was able to take the lead by 3. This would have been a big upset for BYU on the road. Utah's a much better team. And then Gianna was able to hit a couple of free throws in overtime. Gianna went 10 of 10 from the line. Maya went 9 of 10. So those two combined 19 of 20 from the free throw line, setting up Maddie Wilkie's half-court heave. And what a moment. Maddie will never forget that for the rest of her life. And it was cool to see kind of the dog pile and the team going crazy. Utah women advanced to the Big 12 tournament where they will be a top 6 seed. BYU will be the 12 seed on the women's side. On the men's side, Brigham Young continues to roll. They've now won 6 straight basketball games. They embarrassed West Virginia. They dog-walked them down at the Marriott Center. That game was over pretty quickly. And the nice thing, if you're a BYU fan, is they didn't shoot it very well. They did not make a 3 in the first half. Now, you knew at some point a team that really is that proficient offensively was going to start knocking down shots, and they did in the second half. They hung 52 points on West Virginia in the second half and 77 points against West Virginia. That's the most they've allowed in Big 12 play. But this really was the Traore kid, Fus Traore off the bench. West Virginia, for some reason, decided to guard him one-on-one. And when you give Fus space on the block, he is impossible. He's got excellent footwork, great patience, can finish with both his right and his left hand. He went 9 of 11 from the floor. He had 20 points and 10 boards. Richie Saunders, once again, named Big 12 Player of the Week, but he only had 13. This was kind of a defensive effort for Brigham Young, but you've got to love that they didn't necessarily rely on just knocking down a bunch of threes. And they've got a massive game coming up in Ames, taking on Iowa State. And if they win that game, they're going to be a top 4 seed in the Big 12 tournament. I don't think they can catch either Tech or Arizona. They're a full game behind them. They would need a little help. But a top 4 seed in the Big 12 tournament gives you a double bye into the quarterfinals. And at this point, not only is BYU a lock for the NCAA tournament, they might even get a top 4 or 5 seed, depending on what happens the rest of the way. Utah Jazz in action tonight. They're taking on the Detroit Pistons. Got a loss, so way to go against the Pelicans over the weekend. Jazz are essentially resting most of their vets. We know what time it is down the stretch. They're just losing games to up that lottery position. If they're one of the 3 worst teams in basketball, they will have a 14% chance of the number 1 pick. It goes down incrementally from there. If you're number 4, it's like 12.5%. Number 5 is like 10 or whatever. But you want to be one of the bottom 3. And the Jazz are right on pace for that. All right, we'll catch a break right here on a Monday afternoon. And coming up on the other side, we'll continue to talk some hoops with one of our favorites. Tom Haberstroh is batting leadoff. Happy Monday to you. Keep it right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. I timed the Uncrustable perfectly today. Just like you could not have done it better. I'm not sure if it's like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, but if you can get it when the jelly is still a little bit cold and it's like a little crunchy.
Ooh.
Oh, man. Knocked it right out of the park. I usually save it till 3, but I tried something new today, and I think I'm onto something.
Grape?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm all in on the grape, man. Like, I've now only started to buy only grape. I don't buy the strawberry.
Oh, really?
I haven't tried it. There's, like, new flavors, but I'm all in on the grape.
There is quite a few. There's like a honey one. I mean, let's be clear. It's not anything groundbreaking. This is a peanut butter and something else sandwich. There's honey ones. There's strawberry jam. The Uncrustables, though, they don't miss.
Well, I'm just afraid that they're, as the kids would say, they're doing too much. They're trying too hard. Just stick with the basics. At least that's my opinion. We've got Dunny on the program today. RSL was able to get a win. The voice of the Utes, Bill Riley, stops by. Sam Monson for some football. But on a Monday afternoon, it's always good to start our week with my buddy Tom Haberstroh to talk a little pro basketball. Tom, happy Monday, buddy. How we doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. FCAC champion Staples Wreckers. You're talking to an alum of the reigning champion FCAC Staples Wreckers. That's right. That's right, Spence. I had that in my back pocket before I came on.
You know, you don't have to rub that in. I'll just encourage you to go look at the box score from 1996 at Staples High when your boy just took Pete Van Sicklen and Ernie Varina to school.
Well, I don't know if you know this, and this is for another time, but the suburban teams in the FCAC are now reigning. They're now dominating the FCAC, which is very different than when we were growing up. But I digress. That is another topic for another conversation. And I am here in Portland. I am in studio for this 4-game trip that the Blazers are on the road, and they just finished up a game against the Cleveland Cavaliers in overtime. It was an amazing game, and the reason why we have Pearl Jam starting up is because I am here in the Pacific Northwest, coming to you live from Portland, Oregon.
I love it. Are you a fan of the PNW, as those of us out here like to call it?
Yes, and there's such a great food scene. And people are very friendly. There's like, so here at the hotel, there's a Purell dispenser, like a hand sanitizer dispenser. And it says, spread joy, not germs.
Love it.
To me, that is Portland in a nutshell. There's just on something as just random and basic as a hand sanitizer machine, they got to make it weird. They got to make it fun. Spread joy, not germs. Words to live by.
Keep Portland weird, man. I'm telling you, I've got buddies up there, and if you watch like propaganda news, you believe that the city is dead. It's not. It's very much great. Do not watch the news and believe what they tell you. Just go and experience it. How often are you able to get up there? Because usually you do all this stuff via Zoom, right, or in the studio in your house.
Yeah. I come up a couple times a year, and I got a cousin, one of my close cousins here in Portland, so it's always great to come. The food scene is outrageous. I have that Top Chef podcast, Pack Your Knives. If you're a big fan of that show on Bravo, Top Chef, you can listen to that. And I got to eat at one of these Top Chef restaurants called Gregory Gourdet. And like, man, every time I come to Portland, I'm just blown away at the food scene, the beer scene, like all the arts here in town. It's just a great, I love coming here. Besides, this is the only pro sports team in the 4 major sports here, and they really care about their Blazers. And I know Salt Lake, you guys are experiencing this too. Is just like they're adding an NHL team there, and I got to imagine, does this mean that the Jazz lose some of their real estate in the sports conversation? I'm wondering. I'm curious.
It's a good question, and, I've often drawn parallels between Salt Lake City and Portland. They have an MLS team, and their soccer fans are very intense, and it's a really cool soccer experience like we have here. Right now, the hockey club's presence has not seemed to dilute the fan base when it comes to attendance for the Jazz. What's interesting, Tom, is we got some TV ratings data a couple of weeks ago, and when the Gobert, Mitchell, Quinn teams, when they were at their peak, the Jazz were second in the entire league in local NBA ratings. The Warriors were one, and this was like 2-3 years in a row. And now the Jazz are like third to the bottom, and they have the second worst drop as far as ratings go locally. So there's information available to indicate people aren't watching the games at home as much as they typically do. but I think I've been to maybe 9 or 10 games, and every game I've been to, and look, I will admit to being a snob. I only go to the games where the good teams are actually playing on the other side because the Jazz, we know the deal. But every game I've been to, Tom, that arena has been packed. The Jazz fans continue to show up, at least from my vantage point.
Yeah, and Blazers fans too, is that even though they're going through this rebuild, the attendance is strong, and we just on the broadcast side have the highest increase in year-over-year audience numbers. The ratings have increased by,
Nice.
I think, something like 60%. And, the team right now has the second best defense in the NBA, the Blazers do, since they made this lineup change, Shaedon Sharpe out of the starting lineup. Tamani Kamara is a beast, and Will Hardy has talked a big game on Tamani Kamara, loves that guy. And it reminded me, like the Jazz, they would love a player like that. And I've always said that Tamani Kamara is like the Walker Kessler of the Rudy Gobert trade, is like a kind of like an afterthought, a throw-in that people aren't really excited about at the time of the trade because they're not familiar with his game. And then later on, they're like, oh, like long term, like Walker Kessler's, he's a real piece. Like he's a really good young player in the same way that Tamani Kamara, who's this all-world defender on the wing, second-year player for the Blazers, he's like the real gem of that Damian Lillard trade, where it's like, yeah, he's not as good as Drew Holiday right now, but down the line, if the Blazers can get Tamani Kamara to develop on the offensive end, they've got a real like Jimmy Butler type, Derek White type, and at the time, just a second-round pick. No one thought anything of it, but just like Walker Kessler, a real deal player.
I'm glad you brought up Walker Kessler because I wanted to revisit a topic that you and I covered to start the year and haven't kicked it around lately because it's just been difficult to create interesting narratives for a team that's unserious about winning. And, Jaden Springer signed a 3-year deal. I don't know if that means that they're super high on him moving forward or they just need players on the roster. But to start the year and to start the season, for me, whenever I would go on a different radio show or a podcast, I'd get pretty much the same question, which is, who's around on the team when they're good again outside of marketing? And look, they have a lot of work to do to make sure that they're good in the next 4 years where they have Lowry. Like they are more than 1 or 2 pieces away. But just generally speaking, I mean, Walker clearly has played himself now into that conversation. He's been so good this year. If there's one real positive development for Jazz basketball, 24-25, it is Walker Kessler. So I am more than willing to put him on that list. But if we look at this group of first and second year guys, Keontae George, and we take Walker off the table and we place him next to Lowry, is okay. We know we've got something with you two. Keontae's been better since we asked him to come off the bench. There's a lot to like about the progress Isaiah Collier has made. You can't shoot 25% from 3 and be a lead guard in pro basketball. Taylor Hendricks is hurt. We'll put him on the shelf. Cody Williams, it does not look good at all. So if you look at these first and second year players, if we say, Tom, that Lowry and Walker are around, is there anybody else you're willing to put in that category as of now?
Not right now, no. I don't have the confidence yet. I have to see more of Cody Williams. He looks just too thin, too unsure of himself. He looks like a child out there a lot of times. And I think without J-Dub, I'm not so sure I'd have the optimism. J-Dub being Jalen Williams' older brother, who's an absolute star in today's NBA, who had 40-plus points. And just the Oklahoma City Thunder are not where they are without Jalen Williams. But Cody Williams, it hasn't inspired me to make me believe that he's a real deal player. But, look, last year we had a lot of questions about Scoot Henderson, and I kept coming back to the point that he's super young. And it's hard to grade these guys when they're 19, when they're 20 years old. And that's what I think is the deal with, Cody Williams, is that when he started the season, he was 19. And I just don't think he's there yet. I don't think he's an NBA player yet. But these guys, we need to grade them in like year 3 or year 4. And Walker Kessler is another example of he had a good rookie season. But to really see what they're going to be, you need like 3 or 4 years before you make that evaluation. And Keontae George, I'm not there yet. Cody Williams, not there yet. Isaiah Collier, like you said, has to be more efficient, but you really love the playmaking and the attack mentality that he has. But for me, it's Walker Kessler and Larry Markkinen.
All right. Just for our Jazz fan listeners who are very interested in the current landscape of these prospects rising up draft boards. Now, ultimately, the bottom three teams will all have about a 14% chance, and the Jazz should be in that bottom three. We'll see what happens, but they're clearly trending in that direction. They're resting their vets every night. It seems to me, Tom, that it is Cooper Flag, and then there's a massive gap between everybody else. But are we going to have people like some of the ziggers when people zag, like when Wembanyama was available and people are like, well, I kind of like Scoot. You're like, no, stop doing that. It's him, right? Is there anybody else that's in the Cooper Flag cul-de-sac, or is it Cooper Flag and then everybody else in this draft process?
Yeah, it's Cooper Flag and everybody else. To me, some of these guys, I got to see Duke in person a few weeks ago. At Cameron Indoor, and Maliwak, the big man, 7'2", he's going to be a really good NBA player, but he's not even in the same stratosphere as Cooper Flag. Cooper Flag, the fact that he's averaging 22, 9, and 5 per 36 minutes, to keep the grade on that scale for all players in college basketball. No one has the productivity. No one has the upside. And by the way, he's the youngest guy in the class. That's what I don't think people realize. He's 18 years old and doing this. He just turned 18. So he's not only the best player in college basketball, and dude, like the dude from Auburn, right? He's like 24 years old. They're in the same conversation for player of the year. And I'm just sitting here like they play two different leagues. Like the fact that guy, as good as he is, he's like 4 or 5 years older than Cooper Flag. So what are we doing here? I know this isn't like who's the number one overall pick should get the player of the year, but it's just amazing to me that Cooper Flag is playing head to head with a guy who's like 5 years older than him and still putting up extremely good numbers. Look, the Blazers fans, they're kind of in this very difficult position is they know that Cooper Flag is right there in the next year's draft pool, and yet the Blazers are one of the best teams in the NBA over the last month. And so it is this kind of like, I just hate that this is the conversation for the NBA is like, when you have a good team, I don't want to have to be like, yeah, but they're missing out on Cooper Flag. And that's a tough thing with the incentive structure as you've lived it there in Utah is there should never be a system in place that makes fans feel bad about winning. And that's unfortunately what we've created with the draft. And even though they've done those flattening of the odds to curb tanking and to disincentivize teams from trying to lose, it's still unfortunately a big part of the conversation is whether teams like the Phoenix Suns or the Miami Heat, the Golden State Warriors, should they really go for the playoffs or should they tank for Cooper Flag? And unfortunately, we are still in that conversation no matter what the league has done in the recent years to curb tanking.
One more Jazz thing here. If we operate off a fun hypothetical and say, okay, finally Lady Luck shines on Salt Lake. Finally, the Utah Jazz received the lottery luck that they've never received in the history of this organization. It's crazy that they've only been to the lottery 9 times for a team that plays their basketball in Salt Lake City. They've never moved up. They've only stood pat or moved down. And they are able to grab that number 1 pick. And we enter next year, Tommy, with a front line around here of Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and Cooper Flag. First of all, tickets would be flying off the shelf, and they would be very popular. Yeah. But second of all, from a basketball standpoint, we got something now, right? Like that's now something the fan base can say, okay, now here we go. I can see a future.
100%. And I don't think that those 3 guys can't play together. I mean, you look at Cooper Flag, he's kind of a Luka in the sense that he is he's a hub of your offense. And is Markkanen the hub? I don't think I liken Markkanen as a tall Klay. Like Klay Thompson, he's an amazing shooter, but he's not a guy who's going to be ball dominant and running the offense and playmaking for everybody else. That's Cooper Flag. Like I see that's the vision for this dude is like KG. Like KG was a guy who was the hub of the Minnesota Timberwolves at his peak. And yeah, the Boston Celtics KG wasn't that guy, but man, like Pete KG, he very much was a point big. And I see the same thing with Cooper Flagg. So if you have Walker Kessler and his rim protection, and then you have the weak side help protection that a Cooper Flagg gets you, overnight, if they can find, some shooting around those guys, overnight, the Utah Jazz would be a playoff team. I firmly believe that is the impact, the effect of Cooper Flagg.
Let me ask you, just because you'll be good with this, you live there. I've always wondered, so Durham, what's like a 2-hour drive from Charlotte, roughly, something like that?
Yes.
So is there anything that would turn Charlotte or just that area in North Carolina into a pro basketball market in a way that we haven't seen? Like, Charlotte's going to be one of the 3 worst teams, I think, along with Washington and Utah. If the Hornets get number 1 and they put Cooper Flagg next to Ball, is there anything that will turn that area into a pro basketball market that we haven't seen so far? I thought it was going to be more of a natural fit than it seems to have been.
It would 100% put people back in the seats for the Charlotte Hornets. The whole city is ravenous for something to cheer about. The city just got an MLS team, right? They've got this LaMelo Ball kid who's like just turning the corner and trying to be a winning player, but the roster, they're breaking it down to the studs with the new ownership. And you have to remember, the Charlotte Hornets had the longest sellout streak in NBA history at one point. They were a huge market in the 90s. During the 90s with Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning, Muggsy Bogues, they were huge, and especially so in the local market. And it was impossible to get a ticket to go see the Charlotte Hornets. So it's there. There is this kind of this sense that we've got a huge fan base of basketball with UNC, with the Tobacco Road right here, that if Cooper Flagg, coming from Duke, can come here in Charlotte and be the face of the Charlotte Hornets, it'll change everything. And he is a very, very serious basketball player in the way that there are a lot of questions around LaMelo Ball and how serious he is about winning. He's never been on a winning team. That's not the case with Cooper Flagg. There are no questions about his desire to be professional, desire to be a winning player, and to do all the little things to win basketball games. And the other thing I will say, the Utah Jazz and the Charlotte Hornets are very similar in this sense, where they always feel like they are the bridesmaid, never the bride when it comes to the draft lottery. I'm going to remind the listeners here, the Charlotte Hornets and the Bobcats history in the NBA draft, because it's crazy. All right, number 1, in the Dwight Howard draft, who did they get at number 2? It was Emeka Okafor. The Charlotte Hornets could have had Dwight Howard, but instead they got Emeka Okafor. In the Shaquille O'Neal draft, of course, the Charlotte Hornets didn't get the number 1 overall pick, even though they're one of the worst teams, and they ended up getting the number 2 pick. When Victor Wembanyama was the number 1 overall pick, the Charlotte Hornets ended up at number 3. In, of course, the Anthony Davis draft, they couldn't get number 1. They ended up at number 2 to get Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. The fall off between these generational bigs and the number 2 or number 3 guy that the Charlotte Hornets ended up getting has been outrageous. The fans always say, there's something that the league will not let us get the number 1 overall pick, because look at this slew of generational bigs that come through the NBA, and we always seem to get the number 2 pick. And hopefully for Hornets fans, that changes. Hopefully for Jazz fans, that changes. But there's only one Cooper Flagg, and unfortunately, those fan bases can't all get Cooper Flagg. And so for many, many fan bases, this is just going to be another year of losing.
That is brutal. I don't think I've ever heard anybody articulate that draft history before. That's a baby's breath away from several franchise pieces. Goodness. All right, Tom, let's move off the Jazz now, and let's get some big picture thoughts about what's currently happening in the league. What are you willing to say about where the Lakers are at today and winning 6 straight games? Luka kind of taking over as the centerpiece against the Clips the other night, and LeBron really certainly not looking near his age. Are you willing to say that they need to be put in the category with OKC and I'll say Denver? Maybe that's your tier 1 in the West. Are they a legitimate threat come playoff time now?
I've got OKC in its own tier out west. I've got Denver and the Lakers in that and the Golden State Warriors in that second tier. So on TomTheFinder.com, I tier out the contenders by 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star ratings. And this morning, just released my newest title tiers. The Lakers are upgraded to a 4-star status. And I look at their performance with Luka Doncic, and it's all about LeBron looks rejuvenated. Like, he looks like prime LeBron right now in the sense that he's trying a lot harder on defense. He's everywhere defensively. He's running out in fast breaks. His transition game, it looks like they breathe new life into LeBron. And Draymond Green said this about Jimmy Butler, the acquisition. Right after they got Jimmy Butler, he said, we're going to win the championship. He said it over All-Star Weekend. And it's because of belief, capital B, belief. And in some ways, I see the same corollary for the Los Angeles Lakers as LeBron believes. I think he gets Luka on his team, and he believes, like, he is the one. Like, Anthony Davis is great, but he ain't Luka Doncic. And the way that they have chemistry out on the floor is insane. There have been 19 assists from Luka to LeBron already. By far the most. The assist recipient of Luka's assists is number one is LeBron. And the crazy stat from Dean Oliver, who's the godfather of NBA analytics, who wrote the Bible of NBA analytics called Basketball on Paper. He works for the ESPN's analytics department now. He runs it. And he just tweeted out that the shot quality of Luka's assists to LeBron before he shoots the ball, an average player would shoot 76% on those shots. Jeez. Think about that. Luka is finding LeBron in spots where the average NBA player would shoot 76%. And of course, LeBron is way higher than that because he's LeBron. But do you know how hard it is to get defenses to forget about LeBron James or miss him or lose him or not even lose him? Just Luka can place the ball in LeBron's hands in ways that no one else can. Like when you look at those touchdown passes that Kevin Love used to throw to LeBron in Cleveland, Luka's doing it like 3 times over. Like every time that Luka gets a rebound now, defensive rebound, LeBron's running down the floor and getting a wide open layup. And that's what's scary about this is that Luka Doncic has way more chemistry than Dwayne Wade, than Chris Bosh, than Anthony Davis, than Kyrie Irving. It seems like he has way more chemistry with LeBron James than any of those guys had at nearly lightning speed. So LeBron's already got this in like 5 games playing with Luka. So I think they're in the 4-star tier because they don't have the bigs that I think is required to beat, all the teams that they need to beat in order to get to the NBA Finals. But on Basketball Illuminati this week, we had Brandon Payne on, who's Steph Curry's trainer and one of the great skills coaches in the NBA, longtime shooting coach. He was just talking about how he thinks that the Lakers are every bit a championship contender as the rest of them, Cavs, OKC, and Boston. I might not go as far to say that, but I think they're just in a tier below the Oklahoma City Thunder because of that chemistry between LeBron and Luka.
All right, before I set you loose, I'll ask you a similar question, but we move over to the East, and on Friday night in Boston, Donovan, man, when Donovan cooks like that, it's just a lot of people around here kind of miss those days, but he went for 41, and the Cavs stormed back in the second half, and they took care of the Celtics. And look, the Cavs winning is not new, but they're 50-10. They've won 10 straight, and they're 7.5 games ahead of Boston. At what point do we stop with the whole Boston and everybody else narrative and start to talk about the Cavs in a more serious way, especially with the trade they made that you've talked about, grabbing DeAndre Hunter, which kind of went under the radar because, Luka was traded?
Yeah, DeAndre Hunter, I think, could be the missing piece from 32 points yesterday against the Blazers, where Tamani Kamara was busy locking down Darius Garland, 4 of 16 shooting from Darius Garland, and here comes DeAndre Hunter, like, oh, I can carry this offense down the stretch. They didn't have that before the trade. Now they have this piece, DeAndre Hunter, who's a big wing. I think he's a 4. he's a natural for in today's modern NBA. And so they can go small like they did a lot in that game yesterday with Jared Allen on the bench and Evan Mobley at the 5. And that dynamic is huge. I'd pick the Cavs as the favorite out of the East right now. They're 43-0 with a lead going into the fourth quarter. They have not lost a game with a lead in going into the fourth. I think the stat was 38-1 after a lead in the first quarter. So going into the second quarter with a lead, they've only lost one game this season. They're relentless. Kenny Atkinson's done a great job there. And I think Cleveland is right there in that top tier. If you go to TomTheFinder.com, you can see my tiers, my title tiers that I do every week. And I haven't changed. It's Cleveland, it's OKC, and it's Boston, and then everybody else. I think Boston's really good, but man, Cleveland's coming for them. And I really believe that they should be on the same title tier as Boston, the reigning champs.
Staying at the Nines?
No, I'm staying at the Hyatt Regency by the Convention Center.
Well, what's that restaurant that they have at the Nines? That's a good spot. You got to hit that up.
Yeah. So the chef there, Gregory Gourdet, he opened up his new restaurant after Top Chef, and that's the one that I went to when I first got here.
Okay.
Is Khan. And the Nines restaurant up top is very good, but the chef behind that now has his own restaurant, and it is awesome. And the Blazers, the Blazers, there's probably something like this in Utah and Salt Lake where like the Jazz players and the Jazz front office guys love to go there. That's what this restaurant is. It's called Khan, Kann, by Gregory Gourdet, and that's the spot in Portland. If you want to hit up a really good restaurant, if you're visiting, go hit up Khan if you can get a reservation.
All right, my guy, where can everybody and by the way, here that's Valters. It's the Italian restaurant Valters. That's where all the NBA guys like to go. So next time you're in Salt Lake, hit that up. But before I set you loose, where can everybody go find your work?
At Tom Haberstroh on X, TomTheFinder.com, Yahoo Sports, and the Blazers broadcast. We got Philadelphia 76ers tonight. Very exciting. No Joel Embiid, and who knows about Paul George.
All right, buddy. Thanks for the time. Enjoy Rip City, and we'll chat soon.
All right. Thanks, Spence.
All right. The great Tom Haberstroh. We will catch a break. We've got 1 hour down. We have 3 hours to go. We'll get back to some jazz. We'll get back to some college basketball. 4 o'clock hour is going to be all college and pro football. But coming up on the other side, RSL hopefully answered some questions on Saturday, home opener with a win against Seattle. The birthday boy, Donnie, stops by on a Monday afternoon. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, we've got Ryle stopping by today, voice of the Utes. Bill Riley, set your alarms for 4 o'clock, so about 50 minutes from right now. We'll do some Utah men's basketball with Bill. We'll do some Utah football with Bill as we are high speed ahead to spring ball. We're going to have Coach Witt on the program, by the way, coming up on Wednesday of this week. Coach Witt will stop by, so stay tuned for that. Sam Monson later on for a little NFL draft, some combine chatter as well. But RSL, hopefully for a moment, calmed the masses with a 2-0 result against Seattle. It was the MLS home opener for the Lads on Saturday. Our next guest was on the call, and he is celebrating a birthday, I believe, today. Yes, Brian Dunseth, happy birthday, buddy boy.
I appreciate it. Yesterday was my birthday, but
okay.
I appreciate it nonetheless, my man. Thank you so much.
So you're what, 42? Is that right? Thereabouts?
Yeah, maybe 6 years ago I am.
All right, okay.
No, unfortunately, 48 years old, man. And I don't know, it's weird. I can't be the only one out there in radio land who still thinks they're 23, 24, but then wakes up with like a crank in their neck, their back hurts, and somehow, they've got some foot issue out of nowhere. Yeah, I'm young and dynamic in my mind, and I'm beat up and old in my body.
You're preaching to the choir, man. I pulled my hamstring in the shower just trying to apply, body wash. How old was a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Brian Dunseth when he first landed in Salt Lake City?
Oh, I think I was 26.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I was 26, 27, somewhere in there.
Okay. Man, you've been around these parts. I know you left for a moment, but you've been back. You're basically a local, Dunny, by now, aren't you?
Oh, dude, I represent the 801 really, really well. I do what everybody from Utah does. When somebody speaks high of this beautiful state of ours, I tell them it's horrible, that they'd hate it, and don't even think about visiting because you wouldn't like it, just to keep all the riffraff away. No, I'm through and through. My wife Jade went to Skyline, went to Westminster. My boys are going to Churchill and Skyline. I'm not going anywhere, man. I love the 801.
Yeah, it's good living here. There's no doubt. All right, Dunny, let's start with a little good before we dig into potentially some bad. What, if anything, did that result? And you and our guy Max on the call, what did that result do just to kind of calm people down 2-0 in the home opener as far as MLS play goes?
Yeah, I would say, Spence, and I agree with you to an extent, but I would say it was actually more important inside of that locker room for a group of players. Listen, they're missing 42 goals and 29 assists. If you go back a calendar year, talking about Chicho Rongo, Andres Gomez, Anderson Julio, and Matt Crooks. The beauty in that is when those type of players leave, there's a huge upside to it, which means inside that locker room, there's a great opportunity for young players to fill that vacuum, not only on the field, but maybe more importantly from a leadership perspective. On top of that, I think for Pablo Mastroeni, when you're looking at Ajago and you're looking at Piol, two players that are young, dynamic, have similar player profiles, one of these guys, or going out on the international market, one of these guys, you got to find somebody who could be that next Alvaro Saborio, that next Chicho Rongo. On top of that, I thought defensively at times they were pretty poor in the first couple of games. I thought they were rock solid in the back with Cabral, the relationship between Justin Glad and Philip Quinton. Emeka and Brian Ojeda picking up right where they left off. And I thought there was a tweak, and I'm not sure too many people noticed this, but I think it could have outstanding ramifications going forward. And that was making Diego Luna the undisputed playmaker centrally underneath either Piol or Ajago, and sliding Diogo Gonzalez out to that left-hand side. And what it signifies to me, Spence, is that Diego Luna has the keys to the Ferrari, and maybe Diogo Gonzalez, who hasn't lived up to expectations so far, maybe a little less pressure and a better opportunity to kind of hide in the shadows and pick up some really important vacated spaces with work ethic and the running that Diego Luna's been doing in that number 10 position.
So I want to throw something at you that Jason Kreis threw at me because you referenced Diogo, who was brought in last summer during that transfer window, and is technically, I think, the only DP now on the roster. And to your point, there
Correct.
just haven't been enough bright moments to say, okay, that's our guy, that's our DP. And Jason said the very same thing happened at the start of Javier's career, Javier Morales' career here in Salt Lake, where, you know the story as well as anybody. Jay takes the gig. He's having a tough time getting anybody to let him sign players, so he just takes a flight to Argentina and finds Javier, finds Fabian, and, of course, Matias Mantilla, which didn't work out as well. But is that a good experience in parallel to draw upon for RSL fans? Like, yes, Diogo has struggled, but so did Javi. And Javi, for most people, including me, is the best player who's ever played here.
It's a good food for thought training exercise. A couple different things here. At the time, Javi came in to play that number 10 position. Remember, he was diving all over the place.
Yeah.
He was always on the ground.
Yep.
And we were concerned that there was a physicality issue. But Javi still could play. Diogo, for whatever reason, Matt Crooks was preferred over Diogo. And we could talk about adaption, and we could talk about time. We could talk about what I feel was a failure for Real Salt Lake to get the job done way quicker than it needed to be, similar to Chicho getting into market, 3 weeks prior to even his availability to start training. Pablo, quite frankly, preferred Matt Crooks and Chicho Arango together when healthy, and he preferred Anderson Julio with Diogo because of the positioning. I take what Jason's analogy is, and what I'll do is I'll hopefully add to it that if Diogo Gonzalez is anywhere near as productive and important as Javier Morales was to Real Salt Lake, well, then you've got an iconic 10, not just for the present, but for the future as well. But as I say that, I wonder out loud for Diogo if ultimately he's a player that thrives on having guys that are also leaders amongst him and having guys that are as talented, if not more talented, because during his time, that was certainly the case at Benfica and Copenhagen. A guy that was going to start each and every game, but a guy that maybe like Albert Rusnak during his tenure here at Real Salt Lake, you didn't have to lean on him as much as maybe the observance of being a designated player is in Major League Soccer.
So tell me, Dunny, from your perspective and the inside knowledge you have, what is fair to say about the front office, the ownership group right now? Because, with all of the moves they made, and, we could go over all of them. It's Chicho to San Jose. It's moving Andres on. You referenced Matt Crooks, Ando, everything. The number that I've been told is they pocketed, between 15 and 7 mil, which is great. I mean, and I understand that the Andres thing is now proof of concept. But if you're a fan of the club, you're expecting that money to be reinvested into the club to get top shelf talent. And if we're honest, that just hasn't happened yet. What's fair to say about the process, in your opinion?
Yeah, there's a couple different factors. And I'm no apologist for Real Salt Lake, to be clear, because I think every team has certain things happen throughout the course of their 1-year plan, their 3-year plan, their 5-year plan, which is everything's great until you get punched in the face. RSL got punched in the face on a couple different occasions. And whatever it was, however we kind of finalized the Chicho Arango departure, the reality is, from a financial standpoint, Real Salt Lake as an organization took a $4 million bath on what the output was for what they paid for him versus what they ended up inevitably getting as a distressed asset, moving him to San Jose. Anderson Julio had a big option year, and at that age and at that price, the club certainly felt as though they could maybe not upgrade, but upgrade in potential, which is what I think they've done, although you've gotten rid of one of the, the most physically dominant in transition moments in Major League Soccer in Anderson Julio to stretch the field, and we certainly saw them do that in Week 1, getting the game winner on the road in Houston. Matt Crooks' family didn't settle. It's similar story happened up in Vancouver with a designated player named Stephen Armstrong. I would challenge anyone to think about being by themselves with a young family across, in a different continent, and thinking about that and having to do the player right, well, it might not do the club right. And then finally, Elias Manuel, who was supposed to come over from New York Red Bulls, which I personally wasn't a huge fan of. But in the midst of that trade, there was draft picks and there was a certain amount of general allocation money that was acquired in this offseason. And I think for Manuel, who agreed to the move and then decided that he didn't want to agree to the move, two things will happen. One, you actually got a better return for what you even sent to New York Red Bulls for Manuel, because you're going to end up getting around $1 million from Botafogo in Brazil for a player that never even showed up in market. And number two, and this might sound harsh, Spence, but if you got a guy that doesn't want to be here, good riddance. There's no reason that Real Salt Lake should have to convince some guy why he should be coming to Salt Lake. Beat it. Like, it doesn't matter if we're talking Major League Baseball, we're talking NHL, we're talking NBA. Like, this is a great place to live. And if you don't want to be a part of what's happening out here, kick rocks. And that's exactly what happened. So there's it's been a hefty offseason. I think a couple things caught him off guard. But the window's not closed. You have significant funds. And hopefully, they've identified somebody that will continue to push this group forward in a manner in which they will be significantly better than maybe where they're at right now. But food for thought, that goal from Ajago, 2 goals in 2 matches, hopefully that doesn't skew what the immediate need is of the club.
And I want to get to him in a moment, but I'm glad you brought up Manuel, because I wanted to kick the tires with you on this dynamic and whether or not it's something that maybe we should talk about more than we do, because we talk about it all the time through the prism of pro basketball and the Utah Jazz. I mean, I could give you a number of examples. Some people know about, like Derek Harper and Ronnie Cycli. Others don't really know about, namely like a Kevin Love. There was a trade on the table to bring Kevin Love to Utah when Donovan and Rudy were here, and he said he simply, through his agent, he informed the front office, I don't want to live there. I'm not going to play for the Jazz. I don't feel like we experience that much on the soccer side, but are we starting to? Because, and look, I know that hearkening back to 2005 to 2010 is a fool's errand with how different the league is now. But my prism when I was with the club is meeting people like you and Kyle and Chris Brown, and I could keep going, like transplants who came here and ended up loving it here because of our soccer community and the support that you guys had. Is it a new day where maybe the club is running into the issue of people not wanting to live in Salt Lake City? To your point, if you don't want to, like, okay, get lost, we'll figure it out. But I don't know that I've heard many examples of it happening. Now we have one with a kid that I think they were hoping would come here and play well.
Yeah, I think there's twofold. Number one, I think we have to acknowledge that in football, worldwide soccer, it's a different dynamic here in Major League Soccer. That effectively, the players are league employees. They're not team employees. So usually it's a loan, it's a buy, or it's a sell. You've got 3 different situations you can find yourself in. Here in Major League Soccer, it's different. The club is the club, but you're still technically league employees. So that's a unique dynamic in which when players from outside of the United States have experienced this for the first time, they think they're signing with the club. Unbeknownst to them, that at any moment the club could trade you, and you have no say. It's one of the reasons why I came to Real Salt Lake from being in Sweden, was because I got traded down to Dallas on trade deadline day. General manager quits, head coach gets fired. I'm in an option year, and neither of the 2 knuckleheads who took charge were telling me either they were going to pick up my option or they were going to trade me. And when the LA Galaxy wanted me, they refused to flat out trade me. So I got caught in no man's land with a contract that no one would pick up, and yet I couldn't sign with anybody because my rights virtually didn't exist. Now that's a very difficult 2004 conversation versus 2025. But the reality is it's still a culture shock for some of these players to try to contemplate and wrap their heads around the idea of at any moment I could be traded through no fault of my own. Even when my kids are settled, I've bought a house and, everyone's in school. So fast forward to that. listen, I think the reality is, and we're a very insecure Utah State, right? Especially when it comes to our sports. I think when people hear the name Real Salt Lake, if they're not aware of it, they're going to have to do a quick Google search and figure this out. Number two, I think they'll be aware of the Mormon culture, the universities, the sporting ventures, Utah Hockey Club and the Jazz. And then as they dig a little bit more into it, once they show up in market, I think they're going to be overawed by the ridiculous beauty and, how incredibly nice everybody is in Utah. So I don't know. To your original question, we could potentially be in a situation like that. But I honestly think it's a bullet dodged for Real Salt Lake when it's all said and done. Like I told you, he was a substitute off the bench in an MLS Cup final. I wasn't really sold. I didn't think he was an upgrade to Anderson Julio, but what do I know?
So let's move over now to the group of strikers that are on the roster before I ask you about potentially what's next. And they did sign a player, Jesus Barea, who I know nothing about. And honestly, I don't know anything about any of these guys. I'm learning all about them. But I will ask you about the Iago kid, because that was a really nice finish. Now, the second leg against Herediano, he did have a goal, but he had like 7 that he just should have tapped in. He had so many chances. But I feel like there's something there. I don't know what it is, but he's a big physical kid with good speed, and he does have both of their goals. So before we get to what's next, what's your take on whether it's Barea or Piol or Forrester and what you've seen so far?
Yeah, so Jago, you're right. He had back-to-back goals. He could have had multiple goals against Herediano. He took that goal extremely well. I actually said during the broadcast in the goal call that he took it early, and I think that's one of the things that surprised Stephen Fry as the goalkeeper was coming off his line. A different player profile than what Piol has, right? Forster Jago going through, went to Duke University, spent some time at Nashville. He's got some familiarity with the league despite being a young striker. You can see there's high-level potential. He's got a body type that's kind of Mamadou Diallo for the MLS sickos out there, the MLS After Darkers that are listening to. And if you're out there, you're epic. Piol is a young 20-year-old from, Southwest Australia. 5 goals in 11 games for his club before he comes over. He had that one potential redirect from Catrani's. Ball was a little bit behind him, so he couldn't get it cleanly. But both of these guys, body types are similar, and yet they play dramatically different to one another. And then Barrera, from anything that I've seen, college kid, worthy of a high-level draft pick. And remember, because of the transition from the presidency, there's some paperwork issues that are being worked out in real time. And unfortunately, for some of these work permits or green cards, Real Salt Lake is like many other teams in Major League Soccer and in the sporting landscape, where things aren't getting done as fluidly as maybe they did under the previous administration. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a rotation, not in a bad way, but more of an addition to the roster as this kind of gets leveled out and calmed down. And you see the certain paperwork that was planned on getting done and dusted. But I only saw Johnny in 2 training sessions, and I can tell you that there is some great potential for this young Spaniard. Path less traveled, kind of like Jesper Loffelson coming to the United States to get his college education and then playing professional soccer, which Jesper Loffelson should be starting, by the way, for San Diego on Saturday for San Diego FC, former RSLer. But yeah, high level potential. So I think when we're talking about the roster, Spence, I probably should say this. I don't think this is anywhere close to being the best roster for Real Salt Lake, as it's obviously in flux. But I would say position for position, you've got 2 legitimate starters in each position, and it might be the most competitive position for position roster that RSL has ever put together.
Yeah, there's some definite depth in certain areas, but there just doesn't seem to be depth or, quite frankly, top shelf quality up top. So let's move over now to any insight you have about a striker potentially on the way. Now, Kurt was on the show last week, and he said that they're working on it. Like, they are actively talking to people. And, I know that the fans are just simply a little bit frustrated because I heard you and Max on the broadcast talk about this arms race in the Western Conference where these teams are spending millions and millions of dollars on high-quality players. And to your point, there's depth in a lot of places. The new keeper seems to be a really experienced dude, but you've got to do something up top. So do you think reinforcements are on the way, and do you have any idea what that looks like?
So there's always a couple different ways to look at this, right? There's different mechanisms. Do you want a designated player? Do you want a target allocation money player? Do you want a U22 initiative player where it's effectively a designated player type under the age of 22? Do you want to use general allocation money? There's a new mechanism called cash per player in Major League Soccer. That's what saw Lucho Acosta leave Cincinnati and go to Dallas, Evander leave Portland and go to Cincinnati, Jovic leave LA Galaxy and go to Sporting Kansas City. And here's the other wrinkle and dynamic I've always been intrigued on, and I've never really had clarity. What's the role of Ryan Smith in this conversation with regards to the monopoly money that both he and David Blitzer have? We're acutely aware of both having the sporting umbrella in multiple leagues and having the sporting umbrella, with particular with David Blitzer, worldwide when you think about the investments into clubs in the Bundesliga, the Premier League, Danish Super League, down in Portugal. I mean, the list goes on and on. And what is the valuation and the ultimate amount of money that you're willing to spend, not only on transfer fee, but effectively the weekly wage, the yearly wage? So I guess what I'm trying to say, Spence, is there's a lot of ways to crack the egg. The question is, what kind of egg is going to be cracked? And is it just going to be a singular sunny side up, or are we cooking with an omelet? That all remains to be seen. But my problem, and I'll take this from more of like an Apple MLS analyst perspective, it's tough to try to tell everybody that you're taking CONCACAF Champions Cup serious when you have such a unique history in that tournament, and it's your first time back in a long, long time, and that's the roster that you put together 3 weeks ago to head down to Herediano. I think there's way more questions than answers. And for a really turbulent offseason, I think that's the point that frustrates RSL fans. When you think about, as you referenced, Javi and Nick and Kyle, Nat, and the good old days under Jason. But even when you think about Albert Rusnak or Damir Krylak, Jefferson Savarino, now Chicho, now Andres Gomez, now Anderson Julio, you've got a fan base that really believes in its players and believes in the club, but they need to believe in the club long-term, and who's going to be those next long-term players that can maybe potentially make themselves those iconic faces and names that RSL has always been used to referring to.
All right, last thing, Donnie, then I'll set you loose. And this is tapping into Brian Dunseth, the Apple TV analyst. The Houston Dynamo played Inter Miami, and Lionel Messi did not make the trip because he needed to rest. The Dynamo sent out a post on social media, and sufficeth to say, fans that had shelled out a bunch of money to see Messi play in Houston were besides themselves. The Dynamo did what they could. They've offered some free tickets. But it's just part of the deal, isn't it? I mean, you can't expect him at his advanced age to be healthy every single week. But I find this an interesting topic because, my view on this, and I do view this from an old school MLS perspective, when Beckham came to the league, everyone, all of us in the league at the time said, okay, when do we get him here? And I feel like as long as Messi is playing, every team in MLS should have the opportunity to have him in their city. But if he needs rest, he needs rest, right? I guess it's just part of the deal, but I understand the fan frustration.
Yeah, they certainly didn't need him last night in Houston anyways. Yep. Inter Miami smashed them. I think it's the timing that surprises everybody because you're talking about load management at Game 3, Game 4, and such early start of the season. But also remember, this is an Inter Miami team that kind of bounced around the world in preseason because they were monetizing the Messi effect. I've got a real problem with people taking shots at the Houston Dynamo, Spence, because those from the outside looking in are they're taking cheap shots, obviously, but also are refusing to acknowledge that when people would take trips to Barcelona, to the city of Barcelona, They would also try to coincide that with Barcelona playing at home when Lionel Messi was playing at the Camp Nou. I was guilty of it. I convinced my beautiful wife, Jade, on our 10-year anniversary to stop in Barcelona on 2 specific days so I could watch Lionel Messi and then say to her, oh, no, I was just wanted to introduce you to Lionel Messi. So I got away with it. What people don't understand, or at least what people fail to take into context, is when Lionel Messi is bopping around the United States, it's effectively the same as when Pele was at the NASL with the New York Cosmos, when David Beckham was with LA Galaxy, or say in particular when any of your favorite teams from abroad come to the United States. Maybe not so much Tottenham, but big clubs like Man United.
That's rude.
And Barcelona and Juve.
Unnecessary.
People will spend monopoly money to go see their team because, Spence, it's cheaper and it's easier than getting on a plane, flying abroad, spending the money on the flights, spending the money on the hotels, spending the money on the food, spending the money on the tickets. So what you're creating with Lionel Messi is a once-in-a-lifetime effect to see the Peles or the Diego Maradonas. And if you're an introvert, you're a Messi person. If you're an extrovert, you're a Cristiano Ronaldo person. To see one of these players that are, quote unquote, the best players of our generation. So bravo to the Houston Dynamo in recognizing that in that moment, there's an opportunity. And the disappointment of all of those fans in the state of Texas or flying in from other states to go to Houston, to go to Shell Energy Stadium, to see the Houston Dynamo play host to Inter Miami, they recognize that there were a lot of people only coming for Lionel Messi. Not even for Inter Miami, just for Messi. But they also recognize that, Spence, let's give them an extra ticket and see if we can get them back in the building. And while they may be a Messi fan, they may even be an Inter Miami fan, maybe we can be their second favorite team. And I think that's what they did. Anybody tries to argue that it was naive, that it was inexperienced, that it was silly, that it was dumb, they're as silly and naive to think that this wasn't a moment where the Houston Dynamo recognized that maybe, just maybe, they could get a lot of crossover fans that were there just for Messi, but hopefully can be, short-term and long-term Houston Dynamo fans going forward.
Is it Tito Max simply because his cocktail is Tito Soda Lime? Is that as simple as what it is?
No, it's Tio Max.
Oh,
Max.
Oh my gosh!
But Spence, so I can promise you, he is Tito Max every once in a while.
Okay, fair enough. This whole time I'm like, he must just dig a vodka soda. Now I know the deal.
He does.
Okay.
No, he does.
All right, my man. Happy belated. Always appreciate the time. Hope to see you soon. Okay.
Sounds good, bud. I'll talk to you.
All right. The great Brian Dunseth, RSL, gets a win over the weekend against Seattle at home. San Diego is the next opponent coming up. There's no midweek games for a minute because RSL bowed out of CONCACAF Champions Cup action in a pretty pathetic fashion. So let's see. We've got San Diego, then a road game at Houston, back against Dallas, and then on the road against Minnesota. That's your March schedule for the soccer club. All right, coming up next, the latest with the Utah men's basketball coaching search. Who are the candidates? How close is it to being done? Is Alex Jensen on the way? We'll get to that. But Dunny, brought to you today by our good friends at Burt Brothers with over 30 years of experience in nearly 30 locations. Burt Brothers ASC certified technicians bring expertise and professionalism to every interaction. Industry-leading warranties and low-price tire guarantees. One-stop shop for reliable repairs and maintenance, from tires and alignments to fluids and brakes, offering a full range of automotive service tailored to meet your needs. Now offering value tire options, such as Americus and Summit tires, starting at just $69 with warranties that go up to 70,000 miles. As one of the few AAA certified shops in Utah, Burt Brothers upholds the highest standard in automotive service. Stop by Burt Brothers at Tire Busters locations or schedule an appointment today to experience the trusted service that has made them a Utah favorite for over 3 decades. Burt Brothers, doing it better since day one. More information can be found online at burtbrothers.com. Don't forget, Bill Riley, the voice of the Utes himself, 4 o'clock, Sam Monson, 4:30 for some football. But yeah, coming up next, we'll do the latest on the Utah men's basketball coaching search on a Monday drive right here on ESPN 700. All right, we got Ryle stopping by today. Voice of the Utes. Bill Riley's going to be our guest coming up in about 15 minutes from right now. Speaking of the Utes, time now for a chance to win tickets to the final Utah men's basketball game of the season. West Virginia rolls into the Huntsman Center tomorrow night for a 7 o'clock tip. You can hear that game, obviously, here on your home of the Utes, and you can watch it on ESPN+. So text Utes to 33986 for a chance to win Utah men's basketball tickets. Text Utes right now to 33986 for your chance to win Utah men's basketball tickets. After Ryle stops by, Sam Monson will join us. We'll do a little NFL combine, and we'll do a little NFL draft with Sam. Our local boys over the weekend, last week, combine Indianapolis. Brant Keithy did not participate in the drills, but both Karene and Junior Tafuta did himself a big-time favor last week at the combine. Tyler Batty showed pretty well with the bench press, didn't run all that well. Jalen Royals from Utah State, top 10 wide receiver type prospect. Jackson Dart has kind of shot up draft boards. A lot of people think he might be the third best quarterback. I wouldn't mind, the analysis even being a little bit more favorable. It's interesting to follow the news cycle when it comes to the NFL draft at this point as to are people high on Cam Ward, Shooter Sanders. I've heard a lot of people say Jackson might be even a better prospect than those two. Only time will tell. T. Higgins has been franchised for the Cincinnati Bengals for the second year in a row. So we'll do some football in the 4 o'clock hour. Latest on the Utah men's basketball coaching search. So, as we talked about last week, it looks like Alex Jensen is going to be the number one target, nothing official. I think they will interview a number of different candidates. That's my guess. I honestly don't know. I would not mind if Mark Harlan has landed on Alex Jensen as his number one target if you go all in on Alex. I just don't know where Mark's head is at. Taylor Randall, where is he in this process? And is it all about finding a former Ute? Is it all about finding somebody that will invigorate the community? Or do you want to have more of a classic type college basketball hire in, the image of a Richard Pitino or a Bryce Drew? Coaches that have done a good job kind of at smaller schools, and then you kind of go in that direction. Obviously, that's what Mark did as it pertains to the Craig Smith hire, which, of course, ultimately didn't work. So Craig has been let go, as we reported 1 week ago today, actually. That news came down. And now the candidates seem to be in the same spot as we were a week ago, kind of throughout the course of the week. The Alex hire is going to be if that's the direction, it'll be interesting to watch him operate as a head coach in college. And are there things to be learned about what Kevin Young has done down at BYU with how well they've played since he kind of settled in? BYU is 10-2 in their last 12, and they've won 6 straight. But ultimately, none of this is about a vacuum. None of this is about just a couple of weeks of good basketball. All of this is about laying the foundation for success that can last years, right? And the complicated part of the modern day of college basketball, like college basketball has always had turnover, one and dones, great freshmen, or somebody that takes a huge leap between their freshman and sophomore year, and they simply decide to go to the draft. So turnover is always a part of the college basketball scene. That's why for any program to put together a decade or more of great play and advancing NCAA tournaments and extreme success on the winning side and a culture that simply just breeds, despite the turnover, the ability to implement what you want, even though you have new players year in and year out. Those are rare breeds. That's why the term blue blood exists. And the Dukes of the world, or the Carolinas back in the day, or the Kansases more often than not good this year, but teams that have the ability to win year in and year out at a high level, despite having to teach new players exactly what they are expected to do in your program. It's kind of what, I've always liked the way Kyle just bottom lines it. And by the way, Coach Witt is going to join the show on Wednesday of this week, where he says, look, we just need to know that you understand what we're asking you to do and you're physically capable of doing it. I mean, you can be as reductive as doing that. So I understand, right now the potential exciting feel in the community if Alex is the guy. But if you're Mark Harlan and if you're Taylor Randall, specifically if you're Mark, there's pressure to get this thing right. And because there's pressure to get this thing right, Mark will do his due diligence and make sure that he has the right candidate, not to excite the community for one day, not to make sure that, season tickets suddenly take a spike for one moment, but to make sure that finally somebody will take this job. And if we're honest, it has been since Rick. It just has been since Coach Majerus for somebody to take this job and have it for longer than a few years and have winning basketball and exciting basketball year in and year out. Ray Giacoletti, Jim Boylan. I thought Larry was the guy, and I think there's still a case to be made that maybe he was, to be honest with you, but, there's no use in talking about it now. And Craig took the job with a lot of fanfare, a lot of excitement based off of kind of the path that he had taken. But whoever this guy is, Mark will be intertwined with him. There will be no way to separate it because, the one hire Mark Harlan has made on the revenue-generating sports side has been Craig. He did not hire Kyle. And the succession plan to have Morgan take over for when Kyle stepped aside honestly predated Mark. So what will this hire be? And I can promise you, if Mark Harlan sits down with Alex Jensen and they have a number of interviews and Mark just doesn't feel like Alex either wants to do this thing in a way that will last consistently for a number of years and feels like there's another candidate that he sits down with that kind of energizes him and presents a plan, quite frankly, because that's what these interviews are. Mark's going to just ask whether it's Pitino, whether it's Drew, whether it's Alex, whether it's Andre, whoever's across from him, Mark will ask him, what is your plan to rebuild this thing? And make no mistake, that's what this is going to be. I don't know how many of these players on the roster for the basketball team right now will be back. And honestly, I hate to say this, I don't know that that's a bad thing. Most of their better players, upperclassmen. I think you'd like Ezra back. I mean, Ezra's been really, really good. He's a junior. Keanu Dawes over the past couple of games. I'm not going to speak for Craig. I'm not going to speak for Josh Eilert. It just feels like Josh maybe thinks Dawes should have been part of the rotation a little bit more because he's received more minutes over the past couple of games. And honestly, athletically, he kind of stands out among his teammates, quite frankly. Ezra's a good athlete. Keanu's like an elite athlete. He's only a sophomore. I don't think you'd mind having him coming back. Hunter Erickson, who's a BYU transfer, he's a senior, so this is it for him. Of course, as we kind of go down the roster, Caleb is a senior, the transfer, who started his career here, and he, never received a bunch of consistent run. Josh Grant, who joined the show last week, kind of painted a picture where he thought Caleb should be playing more minutes. Lawson Lovering is a senior. He's had a great career. Obviously, Gabe is a senior, all-time leader in three-point shots made, just knocked down his 300th three against ASU. Mason, his brother, also a senior. Sharab James is a junior, and that's really about it. Oh, Wallin. Wallin's a sophomore. I think you like Wallin back. So on the roster right now, maybe Jake Wallin, Ezra Asar, and Keanu Dawes are the players you're looking at to potentially kick the tires to get them back here. But if you want them to come back here, first of all, that will be up to the head coach, right? Whoever takes over. But it also will be up to the administration on the collective side to make sure that the checks that they're writing are what they need to be in order to inspire top talent to come here. I'm not fully sure what the current situation is as far as recruits that were in the fold to play for Utah next year, but obviously they would have signed to play for Craig. How many of them have decommitted? How many of them have completely decided they're going to change direction? I don't know. I mean, BYU is a little bit different because there are a lot of kids that grew up wanting simply the BYU experience. And whether it's Mark Pope or Kevin Young, Richie Saunders and Dallin Hall had scholarship offers to go play in Lexington for Mark Pope in Kentucky, but they wanted to stay in Provo, but they also were paid to stay. I don't know that Utah has that same type of dynamic with players just wanting the Utah type of experience. There are some certainly Utah men. Nate Orchard talks about this all the time. When Nate was a basketball star at Highland, a football star at Highland, he had his grip of offers and he wanted the Utah experience. Morgan Scalley, Utah man, Highland High football star, wanted the Utah experience. So there are some out there, but how many basketball recruits right now that we're in the fold to potentially play for Craig next year simply just want that Utah experience, and they don't care if it's Craig Smith or Richard Pitino or Alex Jensen? Because ultimately what it comes down to, and I've talked about this, and I'll continue to talk about it because I think it's only fair to Craig, this is a roster that badly needs an infusion of top-shelf talent, whether that's through the transfer portal, whether that's through freshman commits, Whatever your avenue is, you got to go get talent if you want to compete with the top shelf in the Big 12. This team was picked to finish 16th in the conference. There's an argument to be made that Craig actually did a good job with a roster that's devoid of talent. But when you're the head coach, you have to wear that too. Now, the good news is, in this day and age of college basketball, with the transfer portal, you can up your talent very quickly, and you can turn things around within one off season. So that should give you some hope. But you got to get the right guy. You got to fill out the bench. And are you looking at the pro model Brigham Young used? And if you hire Alex Jensen, longtime NBA assistant coach, like Kevin Young, longtime assistant coach, do you follow the model where Alex's bench is littered with kind of ex-pros, G League guys, NBA assistants? Do you go the strength and conditioning route? Do you grab somebody who's in the pros? Do you grab the NBA nutritionist? Everything BYU has done with their basketball program has been, first of all, supported economically on a very intense level in a way that I wasn't sure we would ever see. But second of all, they have decided to go all in on the message to young players. Like, look, Kevin talks, look, I respect him. He's a good coach. He talks about how he came from the NBA every time he has a chance. And here's why. You can sit across from A.J. Demancin, his father, and say, I coached Kevin Durant, I coached Chris Paul, I coached Devin Booker. I can teach your son what he needs to be an NBA player. And Alex can do the very same thing. Alex can say, I coached Luka Doncic. I coached Kyrie Irving. I helped develop Donovan Mitchell. I helped develop Rudy Gobert. I can teach your son what he needs to learn to be one of those dudes. And that matters. Of course it does. I mean, BYU signed the best recruit in the country last year. So we'll see what direction we go. Nothing official as of yet, but it does feel like all the signs are pointing towards Alex Jensen. All right, 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. Coming up next, more of this, plus a little Ute football, a little preview of spring ball coming up with Bill Riley, the voice of the Utes. Then we're going to move over to Sam Monson for some NFL draft and combine coverage. It's a drive on a Monday afternoon. It's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network.
Back to Brady on the wing, guarded there by Clay. Brady throws one up, gets it to go with the foul. How about you, Brady Smith? And Utah gets the win here today. Final score, Utah 99 and Arizona State 73.
Really cool moments over the weekend as the son of Craig Smith was able to get a and one opportunity. Brady's a good free throw shooter, so bummer that he was unable to convert that free throw. But the voice of the Utes, who was on the call, is our guest on a Monday afternoon. Bill Riley, sir, how are you?
Spence, I'm doing well. How's your Monday?
Good, man. That was kind of a fun little moment, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine there were probably a few eyes in the crowd that weren't necessarily dry after watching that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, anytime that those guys, the bomb squad, the backup guys get in, you want those guys to chuck it, man. You don't get on the floor very much. Put that ball. I know that you would have never hesitated, but put that ball up. And when Brady got the opportunity there, it was really, really cool. So I was happy for him to get that bucket. Would have been cool for him to hit the free throw to get him to 100, but still a nice moment.
Yeah, I bet Craig actually cracked on him when he got home. He's like, kid, you got to make the free throw. But last time we spoke, Bill, you were in Orlando, I believe, waiting for the team to fly in. And it's been 1 week since the news broke that Craig had been let go. So now that you've had a chance to spend some time around the team, how do you think they're doing? How do you think they're holding up? And how do you think the news has landed with them?
I think surprisingly well, Spence. I mean, again, changes are never easy, but in-season changes are especially tough. But they didn't get off to a great start against Arizona, but they competed, played Arizona almost to a dead even in the second half. And then they came out Saturday, and it was I don't know, maybe because there was a little bit of time between the change in leadership and everything else, but they just seemed to play loose, and they looked like they were having fun. Now, winning is always much more fun than losing, and beating up on Arizona State because, they were not very good Saturday is fun too, but there was just a looseness about the group on Saturday and a lot of high-fiving and smiles and all that stuff. So, yeah, I think they're dealing with it as well or better than you could probably expect.
So I've drawn this parallel a couple different times when the football team moved on from Coach Ludd and Mike Bajakian took over as the play caller. Mike's first media availability, he was very honest. He said, look, this is Andy's system. And, there's nothing I'm going to do at this point in the season to change what he's implemented. And so I wondered if Coach Eilert would change anything as far as what Craig has already put in place, because it's just hard to make changes at this point in the season. But one thing we have seen is more minutes for Keanu Dawes, right? Yeah. And athletically, that kid matches up. So your thoughts on the improved, or I should say accelerated minutes for Keanu, and have you seen anything else that Coach Eilert's tried to do that's a little bit different than what Craig was trying to do?
I think, and he said this in the first pregame chat we did at Arizona, and he reiterated it again on Saturday, Spence, he was going to reward hard play and effort with more minutes. And so maybe that's why you saw Keanu Dawes getting more minutes. Keanu is a talent, Spence. I think he's going to be a guy that whoever the new coach is that comes in really puts the full court press on to keep this kid around because he is really good, and I think his upside is there. But you've seen more minutes the last couple of games from Mason Madsen as well. Mason's a guy that's well-traveled. He's a senior, but he plays really hard, and he's given Josh good effort, and his minutes have gone up a little bit too. So I don't know that, philosophically or strategically they've done a whole lot different. When they don't throw the ball all over the gym and they value the basketball, keep those turnovers down, they've been competitive all year long, and they did that obviously against Arizona State. But I think the one thing that he has done is really rewarded guys that have really busted their butts and given good effort.
How big is Josh Eilert? He looks like he's like a big, strong. He looks like a football coach.
Yeah, he's about 6'5", 6'6". He played basketball. He was a walk-on at Kansas State, and that's where he connected with Bob Huggins. So that's and he was with Huggins for a year at Kansas State as a grad assistant, and then 15 or 16 years at West Virginia with it. But yeah, Josh is a big guy.
Yeah, I couldn't really tell. The first time I saw him, like, who is that football coach on the sideline? That's a big boy. But So look, if I ask you to get weird for a moment, to expand your imagination, like the Long Beach State coach last year was called into the office of his boss and told that he was going to be relieved of his duties, and they marched on and won their conference tournament and went to the NCAA tournament. No part of me is predicting anything like that, but March is wild in college hoops. Rest of the way, win one for the Gipper type approach. How do you think the rest of the year and then into the Big 12 tournament is going to look for this team?
I think they're going to play really hard. I think they've got a really good chance tomorrow night in the senior night game because they played really hard at West Virginia. They're, again, downfall Spence. I sound like I'm repeating myself here, but they turned the ball over and were really loose with the basketball. It's hard to do that against good. West Virginia it's hard to describe them because they're 8-10 in conference play, but they've got some good wins. Their net record's pretty good. They should probably be a little better than they are, but they're not bad. They're a fringe tournament team. But you can't do that on the road anywhere. So if they value the basketball tomorrow night, they've got a chance because that game was a single-digit game till West Virginia made some free throws late. And then BYU's a rivalry game. They've already beaten BYU once. Now, BYU's playing really good basketball right now. But you and I have both been around long enough to know rivalry games are funny things. And if you make some shots or another team isn't making some shots. So I think they've got a really good chance in these next two games. And then they're going to be somewhere, depending on, if they go 0-2, 1-1, 2-0, they could be anywhere from a 7 seed and get a bye, which is a long shot because the other teams have to do some stuff, to a 9 or a 10 or an 11 seed. So they're likely still going to play on that first day of the tournament in Kansas City. But if they're in that 10-11 range, they might be playing a TCU, a team they beat on the road this year already, or a Baylor team that they played really tough. So, again, I don't have any hard and fast predictions, but I know that this team, when they value the basketball and rebound it pretty well, and you've got a lot of seniors that might be playing their last games, they could have a chance to win a few games here in the next couple of weeks.
So you referenced Keanu Dawes, who right now is a sophomore, and I would imagine with his kind of incremental growth, you'd like to see what it looks like when he's actually fully baked as a player. So I think you'd like to have him back. Ezra is a junior. He's shown growth. I think that's a talent you wouldn't mind having in your program. And then I guess the other player would be Jake Wallin, who's a sophomore. Caleb Senior, Lawson Senior, Gabe Mason Seniors. Sharab Jams is a junior. Who do you think this program is going to make a full court press to try to get back on the roster for next season?
Well, obviously that depends on the hire and how they value these guys. But all those guys that you just mentioned, Ezra Sarr is averaging almost 20 points a game and about 7 rebounds in his last 5 games. He's playing at a really high level. He's also beginning to hit his free throws. And I'll tell you, Mike Sharab-Jams, when he is on, like the other day, he had 14 points and 6 assists in that win over Arizona State. I like his talent too, Wallin and Dawes. If you could keep, and again, it's hard to say in this day and age of college basketball because these guys all, have the wandering eye. But whoever the coach is that comes in, if he could retain those guys you were just talking about, that's a really nice base to work with and some good young players to build around in what you do in recruiting and the portal and high school and transfers and everything else. So I think whoever the guy is going to have to evaluate the talent for sure. But if you could keep 3 or 4 of those guys you mentioned, maybe that's a long shot. I don't know because I'm not any of those guys. But if you could keep 3 or 4 of those guys, I think you'd be in pretty good shape with a good base to start from for whoever the new staff is.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you get 2 or 3 back or if you get 0 back, it doesn't change the fact this roster needs a massive upgrade. Now, the good news is, in this day and age, you can do it within a year in an expedited way that you weren't able to prior to. And I know a lot of people don't love the transfer portal, and we'll see what the House versus NCAA settlement brings. If these players are going to be asked to sign contracts where you stick around for 2 years with an option for a third or whatever, nobody really fully knows. But I wonder if you have any insight on recruits that were, ready to play for Craig and talent that was ready to play for Craig, and whether or not this program is, and when Mark decided to move on from Larry, they lost a grip of good players, a lot of talent. Are we expecting the same thing, an exodus of talent either on the roster or on the way to play here with Craig losing his job?
Honestly, I don't know either way, Spence. The on-the-roster stuff, I don't know. They've got the one kid, they've got Frank Jackson's little brother committed. He's a Salt Lake Community College player. Everybody remembers Frank Jackson played in the NBA and obviously at Lone Peak. And in some of my conversations with Craig, he never got specific with me about who they were targeting. He just said they felt good about some people they were talking to. And I don't know if that was, potential transfers or if that was high school kids or what it might have been. So I'm a little bit more in the dark on the recruiting side of things right now. And to be very fair, I think a lot of people are in that same position. There's a handful of programs that go out and, sign some of these top 10, 15, 20 high school kids. But I think a lot of these guys are coming in and saying, okay, we're going to use the portal to rebuild this thing. I use TJ Otzelberger as an example at Iowa State. When he took that job, when he left UNLV and took that job, I think Iowa State had 2 or 3 wins the year before. And he came in, and in that first year, he lost a ton of talent at Iowa State and brought a bunch of transfers in. The next year they were competitive, and then the year after that they were, competing for the Big 12 title. So if you do it right in the portal and mix that with some high school or developmental kids that are in your program, the right person could turn it around pretty quickly.
I know that you are unable to comment on the majority of the stuff surrounding the coaching search, but I will ask you, are you aware of any sort of time frame that Mark and maybe President Randall have in mind before they want to land? Because you can't slow play it. You got to have your guy in place. So are you aware of any time frame that is preferable for the athletic department?
Yeah, the proverbial sooner rather than later is always good, but I haven't been told any certain timeline on any of that stuff. So I think one of the reasons why the change was made a week ago today was to get a jump start on it, get a head start on it, and really get ahead of the game. And so I think they probably, again, would just assume, having done it a week ago, are probably down the road at least a little bit on it.
Tell me what, in conversations you have with people around town, friends of yours, people that care about Utah athletics, away from your job as the voice and director of broadcasting, because we have a bunch of different options, we have a bunch of different avenues, we have a bunch of different concepts and theories about how you can go about this. What do people say to you about what they hope this hire looks like in order for them to support this program?
I think, and maybe I said it with you, or I've been on your show and Scott's show and Sean's show, but the people I talk to, and you and I have some common friends, they're older guys. They're not old guys, but they're older guys now. And they can remember when Utah was really good consistently at basketball in the late 80s, in the 90s, the early 2000s. And most of the guys that are friends of mine that are Utah grads or ties to the Utah program are just wanting to get that glimmer, wanting it to be. I just think there's a lot of Utah fans, Spence, that are on the precipice, when that coach gets in there, that you really see turns the corner a little bit. I think it opens the floodgate for support. And I think the people are itching to get back to the Huntsman Center. And I've just had a lot of people that are, that are really anxious to see who the guy is here that is hired, because I think there's a lot of people that really want to get back out. And to your point, I think you brought it up with me a week ago. There's no reason you can't be a football and a basketball school. Lots of schools do it well. And I think there's a lot of people that are just like, I can't wait to see who this is, because I really want to be back at the Huntsman Center and seeing that great brand of basketball that I saw when I was in college or in high school.
Yep. And if there's a coach that's hired that's able to build this thing up where they win and they play entertaining basketball and it's somewhat consistent, I'm entirely confident this community will show up for that. I wondered, because I hadn't had a chance to ask you this. I believe it was Florida State. I think there are 3 or 4 big programs who have canceled their spring games. Nebraska, I think, is doing it. They're just not doing spring football. They're doing spring football, but they're not doing spring games anymore. Do you think this is something that could seep into the culture of college football, where we just see a lot of teams doing away with it?
Yeah, I do. I think, Florida State did. Nebraska did. I think they used the guise of renovations to their stadium for doing it, but that's a big deal. Nebraska gets 80,000 people because there's nothing else to do in Nebraska. But they get 80,000 people for their spring game. So to cancel their spring game is a really, really big deal. And there was somebody else. You're right. There, USC also
that's
did
right.
it too.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll probably see more of it. I know that Kyle Whittingham didn't have any plans to do it this year. I was talking to some people today, and he's still good doing that spring game. I think we may end up getting to a point, Spence, where it's not so much the game that's important, but it's a spring gathering to where people feel like they get to connect to their football program in the spring, whether that's a scrimmage, whether it's a practice, and then you get to have kind of a fan fest after practice. Because to be very fair, most of these spring games are just glorified practices anyway. They might go for a quarter or quarter and a half, and then it's kind of like and they hold a lot of guys out. So I think fans like to come to the stadium. If they were watching a high-end practice, I think they'd be okay with that too. But I do know at Utah, there's no plans, at least while Kyle Whittingham is coach, to cancel it right now.
All right, I know you got to go, but before I say you lose, since we're in the football space, spring camp for the Utes is Thursday, March 20th. BYU already in action. The 22 Forever game Saturday, April 19th. 15 practices over the course of 5 weeks. Just give me a couple of things you're hoping to learn about a team that's going to look a lot different than it did a year ago.
I think I want to see, first of all, Devin Dampier, because I, like everybody else, has watched lots of New Mexico tape from a year ago, and he appears to be a really dynamic football player. I want to see how quickly, and maybe it doesn't happen in the spring in 15 practices, or maybe it does. Jason Beck's offense takes with a lot of new faces. The offensive line is going to be pretty much the same, but the receiver room is going to be a lot different. The running back room is going to be a lot different, and the quarterback position is going to be a lot different. And they're not going to play as many tight ends. They've already said that. His personnel is a lot more 11 personnel instead of 13 personnel. So I'm really curious to see how all those moving pieces on offense work. And you don't get to see a lot defensively because they don't do a lot of big hitting. But I am just a little curious to see how the corner spot looks and how they fill in some of the voids on the defensive line, losing some guys to transfer and to graduation. So those are a couple of the areas I'm curious with. But I think I'm going to be like a lot of people. I'm going to have my eyes on what the offense looked like. And, Kyle was really pointed in saying, hey, you can't have one of these really super intricate, thick playbooks anymore because you don't have 2 and 3 and 4 years to, integrate guys into that offense and learn it. So to that point, let's see how quickly Jason Beck's offense allows players to assimilate to it. So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Well, it's always good to have football to talk about. So just a couple weeks away, Rouse. Appreciate the time, buddy. Have a good week, okay?
By the way, what's the vibe about Utah basketball on the Asian Posse group text?
You know what? Let me kick the tires, and I'll get back to you. That's a very important question I had not considered, Bill. Thank you for reminding me. I'm going to send a text now.
Will do. Thanks, Spence.
All right. Bill Riley, the Utah men's basketball coaches show will be tonight at 6. So if you want to get to know Josh Eilert a little bit more, stay tuned right after we say goodnight. Bill's going to have the coaches show with Coach Eilert. That's a big man. That's a big dude. I was watching him coach. I'm like, that looks like a football coach on the sideline. So stay tuned for that. Coming up on the other side, though, we're going to bring in Sam Monson to cover some football, some NFL Combine, NFL Draft stuff. Bill brought to you today by our friends at Burt Brothers. With over 30 years of experience in nearly 30 locations, Burt Brothers ASC certified technicians bring expertise and professionalism to every interaction. Industry-leading warranties and low-price tire guarantees. It's a one-stop shop for reliable repairs and maintenance, from tires and alignments to fluids and brakes, offering a full range of automotive services tailored to meet your needs. Now offering valued tire options such as Americus and Summit tires. Starting at just $69 with warranties that go up to 70,000 miles, is one of the few AAA certified shops in Utah. Burt Brothers upholds the highest standards in automotive service. Stop by Burt Brothers at Tire Busters locations or schedule an appointment today to experience the trusted service that has made them a Utah favorite for over 3 decades. Burt Brothers, doing it better since day one. More information can be found online at burtbrothers.com. We doing Ryan from the Dish Pros? We encouraging people to call the Dish Pros today? All right. Well, give them a call, 801-424-DISH. 801-424-DISH. You can save a grip of money on a bunch of different things. Started the show off with Tom Haberstroh, moved over to Brian Dunseth. But coming up next, one of our favorites to talk football, it's Sam Monson on a Monday edition of the program. Happy Monday to you. Keep it right here until 6 o'clock tonight when we say goodnight for the Utah Men's Basketball Coaches Show on ESPN 700. Kind of a quiet night here locally. Most of the college basketball stuff gets rolling tomorrow. West Virginia in town for senior night for the Utah men's basketball team. Head on up to the Huntsman Center to support these young men who've had some tough news with their coach being fired over the past couple of weeks. BYU has a big one at Iowa State in Ames. And then the Jazz are in action tonight against the red-hot Detroit Pistons. I don't know the last time I was able to say that sentence out loud, but let's do a little more football. NFL draft is right around the corner, April 24th through the 26th, and it's going to be inside and around Lambeau Field, where the Packers play. Our next guest is a friend of the show. It's been a minute, but Sam Monson, back on the drive on a Monday afternoon. Happy Monday, Sam. How are we doing?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm good, man. I appreciate your time. First of all, give me your thoughts on what you think the draft's going to look like. How are they going to, logistically, how is this going to work? Because when I look at the NFL website, it says it's going to be inside and around Lambeau Field. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they're kind of basically taking over a block or two right outside the stadium and kind of creating the entire thing from one end of Lambeau to facing away for it down that kind of Titletown little stretch of road there. I think it'll be a pretty spectacular looking thing once they've got it all done and arranged.
Huh. Interesting. Well, out of the box thinking, I guess you got to like that. So, Sam, from your vantage point, when it comes to analyzing the combine, what is real and what is just for TV entertainment? It's always interesting to me as far as how much of this is just kind of a show and how much of this is actually real when it comes to what you see these players go through. How much of this is things you think are actually tangible and we can learn from?
Yeah, well, the NFL does a really good job of turning everything in the calendar these days into some kind of TV event and some kind of must-watch entertainment. It's not like it used to be where it was just the season, the postseason, and then everyone went away for 9 months, and came back again, did it all over again. Now the NFL calendar is almost 365 days a year, and they're really good at making an event out of everything. But there's substance behind it as well. And that's not to say it's all of the puzzle. And I think NFL teams, everybody has gotten a lot better at not getting too carried away by workout numbers and letting it override all of the other data points that you have and all of the other information, and in particular, the tape and your evaluation from scouts. But it is a piece of the puzzle, and understanding, a lot of the athleticism work is about thresholds and does this guy that you think is a good player and has, good tape and attributes that you want to buy into, does he have the measurables that, years worth of data have sort of said, if he's above this threshold, it can play in the NFL. Or if he doesn't, if he falls below those numbers, then you have a discussion to have about whether you want to start chasing exceptions or if you just write this guy off, even if you liked him beforehand.
Give me a couple of winners, combine winners, some players you think helped themselves the most in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think there were quite a few of them overall. Nick Emanwari, the South Carolina safety, he had one of the best performances of any player at the combine. Absolutely spectacular at 6'3", 220 pounds to jump a 43-inch vertical and have the kind of numbers across the board that he did, speed numbers and all those kinds of things. That was a spectacular performance by him and can only be propelling him upwards. I thought a couple of the edge rushers that we thought would run well did. James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee, Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. Those guys were supposed to be impressive athletes, and they were. Jahdae Barron, the Texas do-it-all defensive back, for him to come out. He's getting a lot of comps to Brian Branch, the former Alabama star defensive back who's now become a great player for the Detroit Lions. Barron ran a 4.4 flat. Branch slipped into the second round because he ran in the 4.5. So for Barron to go out there and put that kind of time out there shows that he can be a genuine player pretty much any spot in the secondary.
On the other side of things, a couple of players that disappointed, that didn't have a great week, that have some work to do if they want to improve their stock.
Yeah, I don't think there were too many that had really rough days. Deion Walker, the Kentucky nose tackle, he didn't run a 40, but his jumps were pretty pedestrian. He wasn't as big, I think, as kind of he was during the season. So either he was never that big in the first place, or he's lost weight and lost size, presumably to try and show that he can be a really good athlete, and hasn't yet put that out there. So for a guy whose tape is up and down and is inconsistent, but the billing on him, the book was he would be a spectacular athlete and a guy you want to buy into because of that, didn't really show that, or hasn't really shown that so far between the Senior Bowl and the Combine. Tez Johnson from Oregon, not necessarily a bad workout, but he showed up at 154 pounds, which I think everyone kind of knew. We knew he would be in and around that size. But his kind of composite workout was weird. I mean, he ran in the 4.5s, which is a bad time for a guy of that size. His 10-yard split wasn't spectacular, but he ran a 3-cone that was properly elite, 6.6 type of 3-cone. So he's the classic quicker rather than fast type of player. But also he then showed that he had the fastest miles per hour figure of anybody during the drills. And that's a new sort of aspect of the Combine these days. You're seeing some of the tracking data being put into effect in live action. And not during the 40, but during the actual receiver drills, Tez Johnson was the fastest guy out there running a go route. So just a strange sort of profile of a guy who, looks quicker than fast, but then does show that when you actually get him doing football things, the playing speed is probably a lot better than that 4.5 number.
Most importantly, Sam, were you present for the Ian Rappaport, Jordan Schultz back and forth? I mean, the biggest story to come out of the Combine by far, right?
It was. I was telling my wife that during the week that, this is all anybody is talking about today, and that's not a great endorsement of what's happening during the week, that this was such a big story. Sadly, I think I missed it by about 45 minutes. I had been at that Starbucks on the way by, and then 45 minutes later, I see that this story had gone down. And I can't believe that, this is where it's like Grand Central Station. It's where everybody is for a lot of that Combine. Meetings take place there, all this kind of stuff. So it must have happened in front of, 10, 15 journalists. And not one of these guys has tracked down the CCTV footage, the security tape, to show us exactly what happened. I'm disappointed in my journalist colleagues.
I'm with you. And Sam, over the years, as you stopped by, you seem like a really friendly guy. But I will ask you, have you ever had a beef with another media member that has led to like an in-person altercation?
I don't think so, actually. I've had some sort of, Twitter spats with people, but I don't think it's ever led to the point where when you see them in person, it's been a major problem as well. I don't think I've ever reached that stage as well. I do wonder if part of it is because people assume I'm like 5'2" because I'm standing next to Steve Palazzolo most of the time, and he's 6'10", so I get made look like a child on the regular. But I'm actually, 5'11", so I wonder if it's a surprising thing when people see me in person, like, oh, he's not actually that small a guy. He's not a little guy that we thought he was.
And I'm actually going back and forth in my head about this. Does the Irish accent disarm people? Like, oh, he's really nice, or is it like, wait, maybe he's like an Irish street fighter? Like, what does that do for people?
I mean, the Irish accent's pretty much gone now anyway, so I don't think that helps or hurts either way. Unfortunately, I need to ham it back up with this Dublin game coming this season. Now's the time I need to tap back into the Irishness.
Fair enough. Hey, before we get to, I got a couple of questions about, the top of the draft and quarterbacks and such. But, Jackson Dart played his high school ball here. He was a Roy kid and a Corner Canyon kid. And, he went on to USC and then, of course, transferred on to Ole Miss and had a hell of a college career. Wanted him to stay here, of course, and maybe play for the U or BYU. But when you have an SC offer and that's what you want, that's where you go. Tell me what your analysis is of him. I've read a lot of people who are saying that he's rising up draft boards and such. So before we get to what you think the top of the draft's going to look like, what's your take on Jackson Dart?
Yeah, I think he is rising up boards. I think he's got a lot of he ticks a lot of the boxes of things you're looking for. The statistical profile is very good. He's got multiple years of very good production and performance at Ole Miss, albeit in an offense that I think is conducive to that kind of good play that helped him out there. But he's got some impressive performances, and he's had a really good offseason. And that sounds kind of silly to people. Nothing's happened really since. But He's the guy that went to the Senior Bowl. That's a week of practices in an all-star setting. That carries weight with NFL teams. And I think he impressed people throwing at the combine as well. So I think everywhere he's been in this pre-draft process, he's enhanced his kind of standing a little bit. So, a guy where there's definitely an open question once you get beyond those top two quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, like who's the next guy and how high do you take him? There are going to be teams that don't get their shot at those top two guys and still need a quarterback. I think Jackson Dart is in with a chance to be a lot of people's next guy.
How do you analyze those two, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward? It's funny. It feels like, I guess I'll use the term polarizing when it comes to the quarterback class this year, namely those two. Is there one you prefer over the other, Sam? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, they're very different quarterbacks, so I think you're going to find the league quite split on them. A lot of people are going to gravitate towards Cam Ward because he's the guy with the special traits. He's the guy with the bigger arm, the better athleticism, the spectacular plays on his highlight reel. And a lot of the NFL is going through guys like that. I mean, think of Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. These are guys with those highlight reel spectacular traits that can make amazing things happen. And Shedeur Sanders is more of I'm not comparing him to this player, but he's more in the Joe Burrow style of quarterback, which is a guy that didn't have amazing tools. I mean, Joe Burrow went number one overall and was a fairly clear-cut number one overall quarterback, but people questioned whether he had a strong enough arm, whether his arm was good enough to go at that stage. Shedeur Sanders, I think, is in the same kind of world where his tools don't wow you. Ironically, for a kid of Deion Sanders, one of the greatest athletes of all time at any sport, Sanders doesn't have amazing traits, but he's an accurate passer. He can layer the ball. He's got good touch. He's got a good deep ball. And it's kind of the mental aspect and just the feel for playing the position, I think, that people will gravitate to if you're a Shedeur Sanders fan. So, I like his tape. Part of me, I think, is leaning towards Shedeur Sanders, but I think it very much depends what style of quarterback or what style of prospect you tend to gravitate towards.
Feel like most of the mocks have Abdul Carter off the board at 1 to Tennessee. Do you agree with that? And if not, which direction do you think they go?
Certainly a lot of them, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people bought into this line that the Titans were putting out there, which is we're not going to pass on a blue-chip prospect at the top of the draft. And critically, that doesn't preclude a quarterback. It just means that if they take one, they've already endorsed him as a blue-chip prospect. I think that's, the kind of smokescreen or the kind of not quite misinformation, but ambiguous statement that teams tend to make around this time. A lot of people jumped on that and went, well, they're going to pass on a quarterback. They're going to take, the best player in the draft otherwise, and that's Carter. I think they could end up taking Cam Ward. It wouldn't shock me if they drafted him and said, with his traits, with his ability, with what he did to that Miami program, he is a blue-chip quarterback, and that's the thing the team needs more than anything.
So, ultimately, Travis Hunter oftentimes is referred to as the best player in college football, and obviously we're out here in Big 12 country, formerly Pac-12 country, and we saw Travis up close, a ton. If he's the best player, why isn't he going off the board at 1, and what do you think his floor is, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Generally speaking, if you're not taking a quarterback at 1, teams sort of lean towards a couple of positions. It's edge rusher, it's offensive tackle, and they sort of view those as the safe draft picks at that spot. But I think you're right that we, in today's NFL, with the passing game what it is, we should be asking more and more, if you think different positions are special, why are they not in consideration for number 1? I made that argument back when Sauce Gardner was coming out. If you think he's that special, why are we not talking about a cornerback at number 1 overall? They can have that kind of impact. Hunter is a totally unique player in this draft and in pretty much any draft. He is a legitimate two-way player, not the way we've seen from players in the past where they're a cornerback, but they'll play a little bit on offense and, just enough to we can call them two-way players. Travis Hunter was a full-time guy on both sides of the ball, and that doesn't happen. I mean, it hasn't happened since like the 60s. It's completely ridiculous. And What's more insane is that I think he's the best player in the draft at each one of those positions. I think he's wide receiver 1, and I think he's cornerback 1. And I think 32 teams are going to treat that differently. Some of them, I think, are going to see him just as a wide receiver. That's what he is to us. Some of them are going to see him just as a corner. Some of them probably have 2 different Travis Hunters on their draft board and just rank him as 2 separate players and figure out, we'll figure which way the board lands, what our needs look like, and we'll adjust accordingly. And then I think you're going to get a smaller group of teams that are willing to entertain some kind of two-way playing style for him going forward. The easiest way of doing that is to draft him as a corner and have him play a kind of package of offensive plays. But I think there are other ways of doing it as well. And look, I think there's a bunch of different ways of looking at that. But I think one of them is you can say this cuts in half his chance of being a bust. If he doesn't work out at one of them, you can move him to the other side of the ball and give him a second shot at a career. So I think he's a safer draft pick than players typically are at wide receiver or corner. But I think you're right. There's an argument that Hunter is the best player in this draft. There's an argument that he's the best player at 2 separate positions in this draft. And if he is actually capable of playing, a unique two-way role, that is theoretically more valuable than any other player in this draft outside of quarterback as well. So if you don't believe the quarterbacks are worthy of those top picks, again, I think Travis Hunter is absolutely in the argument to go number 1.
If Travis is adamant that he plays both sides of the ball, do you think that sours certain teams on him?
I'm sure there are certain teams that wouldn't be into that. Yeah, I think there are definitely teams that are saying, look, even now, so I thought it was a bigger problem in 2023, but even on his 2024 tape, on both sides of the ball, you can see plays where he looks tired, right? And so if you're a team thinking about playing him 2 ways in any capacity, what you're asking yourself is what kind of rest can we get him? Like how the workload he had was too much. How can we scale that down? What can we get it down to? And will it be manageable at that point? So I think that's definitely a potential issue. There will be teams that I think just don't want any part of that and think it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the hassle of, trying to get him to learn 2 different sides of the ball and trying to juggle meetings that typically would take place at the same time. Otherwise, there's a lot of kind of logistics that would go into trying to get him to play both sides of the ball. And I'm sure some teams just don't see the need or the person that's most enhanced by the two-way thing is Travis Hunter. And if you're a team that just needs a wide receiver and don't necessarily need the cornerback stuff, there's not much in it for you really to try and just do it because Travis Hunter wants it. But for the teams that do, I think that's the challenge, is not letting him do it at all, but figuring out what the best way of doing it is so that it's not an overall detriment to his play on either side of the ball.
If Tennessee goes Carter at 1, what does Cleveland do at 2?
It's a great question. A lot of it, I think, depends obviously on their evaluation of these quarterbacks. But I think for them, this is a gift that they did not expect to have. They made arguably the worst personnel move that's ever been made in the history of the game with this Deshaun Watson deal. Between the trade for him, between the baggage that he came with, and between the contract that they handed him, which is still being treated as like an anomaly by the rest of the NFL. That has not been precedent. That has not been used to create the next wave of fully guaranteed quarterback contracts, which I think could have happened at one point in the NFL. They have still used that as like a mistake and a desperate act by a team and ignore it essentially when it comes to precedent. That has crippled this team. I mean, they are still stuck with that contract. Watson is now injured with an Achilles injury again. And even when he wasn't injured, he looked like he couldn't be starting for them, that they needed to move on anyway. The only way out of that deal is a cheap enough quarterback that you can have starting for you and sort of make that pain go away and allow you to carry that contract and for it not to ruin everything else. The easiest route to that is a quarterback at the top of the draft. So, if they love Cam Ward, if they love Shedeur Sanders, I think it would be crazy to pass on one of those guys given this opportunity.
So if we operate off, and again, nobody knows how this is going to go down. We're all just guessing. But if it's Carter 1, let's say it's Ward 2, we land on the Giants at 3, and the Giants need a quarterback, but they need a lot of things. At what point do you think Travis Hunter has to go off the board?
Well, the X factor in all this is what happens before the draft, right? Because
Sure.
we've got free agency. We just dealt with this Matthew Stafford, Willie Won't-he drama, and he's going to stay with the Rams. But these are all the dominoes that affect the top of the draft, right? First of all, it was Stafford. Then I think the next domino becomes what happens with Sam Darnold. Does anybody at the top of the draft get him? Does a team saddle themselves with Aaron Rodgers for one more year or 2 years and go with him? I think these are things that can affect who's going to go at the top of this draft. Ultimately, as special as Hunter is, you don't pass on a quarterback that you think can be a starter or can be the guy, the future of your franchise for Hunter. The quarterback position is paramount. It's everything. So if you think you have one of those guys, you have to take him regardless of who's still on the board. If you've determined that the quarterbacks are not worth it or that they're not those guys and you're going to pass on a quarterback, whatever, then I think anybody in the top 5 can realistically make a case for Travis Hunter. And in fact, pretty much any team in the draft. I mean, again, this is a guy that might be the best corner and wide receiver in the draft at the same time. Literally every single team in the league needs at least one of those two positions. So at that point, if you're not taking a quarterback, he's absolutely in the top 3 of every single draft board.
Who is the Sam Monson candidate for the awkward green room draft day slide? The most overhyped player that has a chance of sliding all the way down to the end of the first round that we're all going to watch feeling bad for?
So a big part of that is always the stuff we don't know. It's the off-field stuff. It's the character concern stuff. It's the things that teams have access to that we don't necessarily have access to on the outside. And I know already, there's some rumblings about things that will affect that kind of thing. James Pierce Jr., I think a lot of teams have some kind of off-field red flags for him, and that's why I think you're seeing him start to drop on draft boards at the moment for a guy that I think otherwise would absolutely be seen as a top-tier pass rusher and a top-tier guy. Outside of that, I'm not sure that anyone immediately jumps out as like, this guy is definitely going to slide.
Where do you think, I'll ask you about Shedeur, like floor for Shedeur is what? And I know to your point, there's a lot that could happen between now and the draft in April. I'm a Jets fan. I've told you that before, Sam, a long-suffering Jets fan. They're sitting there at 7. They need a quarterback. Who do you think the first team is going to be like, yeah, we can't, this is where we have to draft Shedeur. He's not going to slide any further than that.
I think that Jets team or that Jets pick probably is his floor. Just because, again, if we're talking about the teams that even if they start picking up quarterbacks in free agency and trades and things, it seems unlikely that every one of those teams in the top 7 would take care of the quarterback position before the draft. So, if Cam Ward is gone somewhere in those first picks, the Raiders, the Jets, I would imagine at least one of those teams is still without a quarterback at that point. And I doubt they could pass on Shedeur Sanders at that spot.
What do you think happens with Darnold? And, again, out here in this footprint, we saw Sam play up close a number of times. And as a Jets fan, when they drafted Sam Darnold, I thought, okay, finally, we have the guy who I think can get it done. And by the way, if I'm Dion, I'm not sure that I want Shedeur in New York. And I say that as a Jets fan. But, Sam has resurrected his career, and he has this chance to have like a second half, Baker Mayfield type run. Where do you think he lands? What do you think that looks like, Sam?
He does, but I think it wants a Baker Mayfield type of contract as well, because those last 2 games were so terrifying for any team that would want to buy into him. He was spectacular for most of the season, and it looked like he had completely changed, and he was a different player, and Kevin O'Connell had worked his magic again, and then it was almost like a switch got flipped, and he went all the way back to seeing ghost Sam Darnold, New York Jets nightmare against the Patriots and Bill Belichick, for those last 2 games, which, by the way, were the most important games the Vikings played all season long. So I think he's definitely earned himself a ton of money, and he's earned himself a starting job next year. But nobody is not going to be aware of that. That is going to needle at anybody who wants to give Darnold the next chance. So, I think his contract is probably going to have to reflect that, the way the season ended. It's not going to be the big, big money contract that maybe he was on course for. I think it should be some sort of middle-class quarterback deal. A team like the Colts would be an interesting landing spot, who seem to have not so much soured on Richardson, but decided they just can't rely on him right now, whether it's injury or playing performance so far. Darnold could step onto the Colts, I think, and make that team a playoff football team pretty much right out of the gate. The Colts would be an interesting spot. I think the Raiders would also make some sense with Pete Carroll and a presumed coach who knows how to take some of the pressure off a quarterback. Those would be the two spots, I think, that I'd be most interested in for him.
Surprised that Stafford ended up back with the Rams. A lot of noise around him.
No, I think that's the spot that made the most sense. I think they were basically trying to get everybody else to set the market for them. My hunch is the two sides were reasonably far apart in terms of what they wanted. I think the Rams probably think that Stafford doesn't have that much long left, and Stafford wanted a bit more guarantees or assurances or duration on the deal than they did. So they basically gave him the permission to go talk to other people, set the market for us, come back to us, and then we'll figure out if we can get it done. I think that's more what this was, rather than a concerted effort by either side to move on from each other.
49ers send Deebo Samuels to the Commanders, and it feels like this is a trade that could do a lot for the Commanders, who, after Terry McLaurin, had a pretty precipitous drop between Terry and whoever you think their number 2 or number 3 was or whatever. And, I've talked about this quite a bit, Sam. Jaden Daniels was out this way at Arizona State. He actually almost was a Ute. He nearly played here in Salt Lake for the University of Utah. And I am still floored that he did that year one. I mean, he transferred to LSU, obviously won the Heisman. But I wonder what your thoughts are on the rookie season of Jaden Daniels and what adding Deebo Samuel means.
Yeah, he was spectacular, and he was getting better throughout the season. I mean, that's the thing. He didn't just sort of start off hot and cling on to it by the end of the year. He was getting better and better and looking more and more assured as the season went on. And in the playoffs, I mean, he looked like the kind of quarterback that could take them to something completely unprecedented. So I'm all for surrounding him with weapons and seeing what he can do as quickly as possible. And the Deebo deal is the perfect kind of opportunistic deal, where that's what having a ton of cap space allows you to do. You might not have been targeting guys like that. You might have been trying to find somebody in free agency, but the 49ers are in a different spot of their kind of salary cap life cycle, and they're trying to shed contracts. And, for a 5th-round pick, you can pick up a guy who's been one of the most dynamic and difficult to defend offensive playmakers in the NFL over the last few years.
All right, Sam, before I set you loose, Philly wins the Super Bowl, and you look at Jalen at 26, Saquon at 28, A.J. Brown at 27, Devontae Smith at 26. They've got the bulk of their best skill position players still smack dab in the middle of their prime. And, of course, we'll see what the offseason brings. They've got a really good young defense. Jalen Carter's 23. I could go up and down the list. Is there a chance that we're seeing the start of what could be a pretty fruitful, fun run for Eagles fans?
Oh, there's absolutely a chance. I mean, it's really difficult to repeat, to do anything like that in the NFL. The Chiefs and the Patriots have kind of broken everybody's perspective of how difficult it is to have that kind of sustained success. Obviously, the common thread from those two teams is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, Tom Brady and then Patrick Mahomes. The Eagles don't have that. Jalen Hurts is good, but he's not great. But they do have the best roster in the NFL right now, and a chance to have the same thing again next year. And if you're going to have a good rather than a great quarterback, that's what you need to still be able to make those kinds of sustained runs year on year. But I think you're right. The core of that team is in their prime, if not younger. They had an amazing draft by the looks of it last year. They're very good at reloading and coming back younger and better. And I think they're absolutely a team that would be seen as probably the favorite in the NFC going into next year.
Okay, Sam, where can everybody go to find the podcast and all your work?
Yeah, Check the Mic is the podcast, MIC. Anywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube as well.
Thank you, sir. Have a great week. I'd love to get you on soon, okay?
Anytime. Take it easy.
All right, Sam Monson. Check out the new podcast, Check the Mic podcast, brought to you today by our friends at Prize Picks, the Second half of the basketball season is here, and the race to the playoffs is heating up on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. Don't miss your chance to cash in as the league's best fights for playoff positioning. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Utah. App is really easy to use. To create a lineup, all you have to do is pick more or less on a few player stats for your shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. So here's what you do. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 when you play your first $5 bet. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700. You get $50 when you play your first $5 bet. You do not even win. You do not even need to, to receive that $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So check them out. You can utilize Venmo, Apple Pay, MasterCard, and more for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. All right, 3 hours down, 1 hour to go on a Monday. Final hour of the program comes your way next. Then we'll say goodnight for the Utah men's basketball coaches show. It's Bill Riley and the interim head coach, Josh Eilert, on a Monday evening. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, let's get it. Drive at 5 time on a Monday afternoon, about 7 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. It's been a little chilly and cloudy and rainy today after our spring-like week last week. The temps have cooled. Going to be a little bit chilly all week with a little bit of rain, a little bit of snow. Although the weekend forecast looks good. Happy Monday to you. Hope you had a great weekend, able to get outside. We had like a 62-degree day on Sunday. The parks were jam-packed. The golf courses were jam-packed. So hope you got outside and enjoyed it. We're looking at about 42 degrees and a little rainy today, and rain in the forecast for the next 4 or 5 days. A little snow maybe on Friday. Then it's going to warm up on Saturday and Sunday. 5 o'clock hour of the program today on a Monday afternoon is brought to you by friends at Burt Brothers with over 30 years of experience in nearly 30 locations. Burt Brothers ASC certified technicians bring expertise and professionalism to every interaction. Industry-leading warranties and low-price tire guarantees. One-stop shop for reliable repairs and maintenance. From tires and alignments to fluids and brakes, offering a full range of automotive services tailored to meet your needs. Now offering value tire options such as Americas and Summit tires, starting at just $69 with warranties that go up to 70,000 miles. As one of the few AAA certified shops in Utah, Burt Brothers upholds the highest standards in automotive service. Stop by Burt Brothers or Tire Busters locations or schedule an appointment today to experience the trusted service that has made them a Utah favorite for over 3 decades now. Burt Brothers doing it better since day one. More information online at burtbrothers.com. All right, we have the Utah men's basketball coaches show tonight. Interim head coach Josh Eilert will sit with Riles Bill Riley to talk about the latest with the Utah men's basketball team, so stay tuned for that. Bill's going to stop by coming up in about 20 minutes-ish from right now. Utah men's hoops was able to get a win over the weekend against Arizona State. Now, Bobby Hurley and ASU rolled into town with, I think, 5 scholarship players. And Utah smacked them, 99-73. Good to see them get a win. I don't know what the postseason chances are for Utah men's basketball. Certainly the NCAA tournament feels like it's probably out of reach. We discussed this earlier. Last year, the head coach of Long Beach State was informed prior to his conference tournament that he was about to lose his job, that he could coach out the year, then he was going to be fired. Well, they went on to win the conference tournament. Am I predicting the Utes will go on and win the Big 12 tournament? No, I am not. But it is the Ides of March, man. Strange things happen in the world of college basketball in the month of March. That's why it's called March Madness. So it is senior night tomorrow night at the Huntsman Center as West Virginia will roll into town. West Virginia got smacked around down in Provo by Brigham Young. BYU is playing some excellent basketball as of right now and might be high speed ahead to a number 4 seed, a top 4 seed in the Big 12 tournament. Now, for Utah's side, if Utah is able to get West Virginia tomorrow at home, which I certainly think they can, and if they somehow roll down to Provo, and it would be a massive upset. BYU is ranked number 23 right now, and they are on fire. You could make an argument they should be ranked higher. My guess is that spread is like 11 or 12. Well, it's a rivalry game, so what does Vegas do with that? I mean, going down to BYU would be a big upset. But if they beat West Virginia, if they beat BYU, it gets them to 10 conference wins and 18 wins on the season. And maybe you're looking at an 8 or a 9 seed as I'm looking at it kind of in real time. And then you have a winnable first-round matchup. But beyond that, I think it's tough to predict this team, to win more than one game of the Big 12 tournament. Is there a CBI-type postseason berth for them in the cards? Not sure. But it was good to see them get that win, albeit against a depleted Arizona State team. And we talked a lot about whether or not we would see anything different after Coach Eilert took over since Craig had lost his job. And schematically, there's not a ton. We have seen more minutes for Keanu Dawes. And I'll tell you what, if early returns are any indication, maybe this kid should have been playing 25 minutes all season long. He was really good against Arizona State. And against Arizona, he looked like the only player on the roster that kind of kept up with Arizona's athleticism. This kid's a big-time athlete. Had a couple of big dunks, a massive block shot against Arizona State. He had 23 minutes. He went for 15 points, 11 boards. He had 4 assists, a steal and a block, 6 of 9 from the floor, 3 of 4 from the free throw line. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, maybe Keanu is one of these players that you look up and down the roster at and say, okay, we'd love to have him back as he's only a sophomore. A lot of that's predicated on who the head coach is, who the head coach is going to be. And as we sit here today, on Monday afternoon / the evening at about 5:12. There's no official word on that situation. Everybody who has talked about it, everybody who has reported on it, everybody who has written on it feels that Alex Jensen is your lead candidate. The reports are that Mark Harlan has already met with Alex, and Alex Jensen as a head coach, and maybe with an Andre Miller as an assistant coach is kind of the direction that Mark Harlan and Taylor Randall are going to go. The timeline is fascinating to me. I have to imagine that they decided to move on from Craig last week. It was a week ago today where that news broke, with the intent of being able to grab somebody pretty quickly prior to the offseason. This is not something you can slow play. And I guess the mentality, and I honestly don't know, we're out to the University of Utah. We'd love to have Mark Harlan on the show, and I'll ask him point blank, like, why now? What's the timing? I guess if you let Craig coach out the season, if you've already made your calculation that he's not your guy, I guess I understand why you just ripped the cord, because if you don't think Craig is your guy, if you've landed on that, and he pulls a Long Beach State and goes and wins the Big 12 tournament, you're kind of in a tough spot, right? So ultimately, I have to imagine that Mark moved on from Craig at this point on the calendar to give him a little bit of a cushion to make the hire prior to really when the offseason gets entirely rolling. My guess is Mark knows who he would like. I would not be surprised if an agreement has already been made and just the announcement has not been made publicly. I do think Mark Harlan will be very thorough about this hire. I think he understands how much pressure there is on him as it pertains to some of the pressure he's felt in the community over the past year or so. I don't think it's any secret. There are a lot of people that were a little bit agitated with the post-game press conference after the BYU football game. And Mark has made one hire as far as the revenue-generating sports go, and the hire was Craig Smith. And, of course, it didn't work. And so this is going to be a hire that Mark will be tied to. And that's how we analyze these things, fair or unfair. If you're the athletic director, Tom Homo essentially went 5 for 5 during his time down at BYU. He hired Bronco Mendenhall. He hired Dave Rose. He hired Kalani Sitake. He hired Mark Pope, and now he's hired Kevin Young. And it looks like, well, we know that 4 of those hires worked out. It looks like the 5th and Kevin Young is going to work out, as BYU has now won 6 straight basketball games. They're rising in the net. They're rising in the Ken Pom. They're number 23 in the country. And they're going to go to Ames, Iowa tomorrow for a massive college basketball game. Iowa State right now and BYU in a virtual tie in the Big 12. Both are 12-6. Iowa State is a very talented team. They have had some really random bad performances, though, and BYU is trending up at the right time. You know, you want to be trending up in March. Iowa State has lost 2 of their last 3, including a weird loss at Oklahoma State. They did trounce Arizona at home. It's a really good team. If BYU is able to get that win, and if they beat Utah coming up March the 8th down in Provo, Brigham Young will be a top 4 seed in the Big 12, which means they have a double bye into the quarterfinals. And that's where you want to be. Ultimately, they are a lock for the NCAA tournament as of right now. Yegor Deming kid was really good against West Virginia. BYU on defense was smothering in a way that we don't see them very much. Brigham Young did not make a 3-point shot in the first half. They made 5 in the second half. They really overwhelmed West Virginia offensively in the second half, where they scored 52 points. But that was a lot of pain points. It was a lot of Fus Traore. And it just was not the BYU outside attack that we're accustomed to seeing. But if you're a BYU fan and you just watch them dog walk West Virginia at the Marriott Center without making a ton of threes, that's excellent news. Because you want to be able to win in a myriad of different ways, certainly come postseason tournament time. And, you know, BYU last year felt like they were trending in the right direction, and then they lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Really, it was Jackson Robinson who saved them from being blown out. This team feels more dynamic. They feel like they have more depth, and it feels like they're just a little bit more nuanced. They're not as reliant on the 3 ball as it appears. They can beat you in a bunch of different ways, and Kevin Young has a really talented roster. Cannon Catchings, by the way, is questionable for the Iowa State game. He picked up a bit of a knock, but other than that, BYU seems to be pretty healthy. Jazz took an L over the weekend against the Pelicans. They're back in action tonight against the red-hot Detroit Pistons, a sentence you have not been able to say since 1988. Then, obviously, Utah Hockey Club back in action on Thursday. And so kind of a quiet night locally, but a lot of good NBA, couple of good college basketball games, one going on right now between Wake Forest and Duke. If you haven't seen Cooper Flagg play and you are a Jazz fan, you should watch him play, and then you should start to pray. That rhymed. Didn't mean to do that. We'll catch a break. Coming up on the other side, we all All right, final segment of the program for this Monday afternoon. It's always good to get Monday in the rear view mirror. So congratulations about that. Final segment today brought to you by my friends at Overtime Cards and Collectibles. So here's what you do. The location is 10673 South State Street in Sandy. If you're a man or a woman or whatever the thing is these days of a certain age, chances are at some point, don't look at me like that, you collected cards. Basketball, football, whatever it is. Baseball cards were massive when I was a kid. So if you have a grip of old cards or memorabilia, like if it's in your grandma's basement or your parents' cellar or whatever, go grab that collection. Go out to Overtime Cards and Overtime Cards and Collectibles. Again, their address is 10673 South State Street. And my friends, Michelle and Chris, will go through your collection, and they'll tell you if any of it is worth anything. I did that, and Chris found a Kobe Bryant Fleer rookie card that I had no idea I had. It was in a box in my basement. Now it's sitting on my mantle, and I hope it's a down payment for my son's house. So it's the best spot for all your football, basketball, hockey, MMA, and even Pokemon card collecting. You can buy all your favorites there, so check them out. Start a new hobby, man. It's a lot of fun. Go out, rip open some packs, look for a Jaden Daniel rookies card. It is a buzz if you've ever tried it before. So check them out online. at overtimecardsandcollectibles.com, where you can buy and trade. 10673 South State Street in Sandy. What is the most valuable piece of memorabilia you own of any kind?
Ooh.
You got to have like Willie Nelson's horseshoe or something. Merle Haggard's guitar.
I have some music stuff that I'd have no idea the value on, but my dad actually ran like a memorabilia store for sports.
Oh, nice.
I want to say 90s, early 2000s up in Heber. Shout out if anyone remembers End Zone Sports Cards.
Shout out End Zone Sports Cards.
So I actually have quite the collection of Dallas Cowboys signed gear. I have parted ways with some of the other stuff that didn't like resonate with me or there's no sentimental value of, but I have a genuinely fairly large collection of like Emmett, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, mostly 90s, early 2000s Cowboy stuff, including a one-of-one Troy Aikman card.
That's got to be worth something.
I think it's worth it's not $1,000, but it's a few hundred, and yeah, there's a few of those in there.
All right, good stuff. So, not a lot of local stuff going on tonight. Most of the college basketball action gets rolling tomorrow on the local side of things, but in college hoops, Duke and Wake Forest are playing right now. If you want to watch Cooper Flagg, and then Houston and Kansas at the Fertitta Center. Of course, it's called the Fertitta Center. So typically a big matchup, still two big names. We'll see if Kansas can make it interesting. Every time I watch Houston play, I just feel like they're so much better than every other team in the Big 12. The Pistons are in town to play the Jazz, the red-hot Detroit Pistons. And we got a good night of NBA action, including the Warriors in action, if you want to see a little Steph Curry. Rockets and Thunder a little bit later on. The Kings take on the Mavericks. Let me ask you, Mr. LeBron James Stan. See what I did there? Kids would understand. Is it time to say the Lakers have to be at least considered as a serious threat to either OKC or Cleveland or Boston or Denver? They've got to be in that tier, right?
If you would have asked me this the day they made that trade, I would have said yes. And that's obviously a lot of faith in LeBron and Luka. But there's no way you can have those two on the floor healthy in the spring and not be mentioned, right? Now, there are some things they've got to figure out. Obviously, the front court is one of them. But you see the synergy that they have and the amount of the basketball IQ that's on the floor when both of them are, or when you can stagger time with them and what it does to an offense, what it does even defensively, communication-wise. Those guys are really smart on that side, although Luka physically is not a great defender. Man, there is just a lot to like. And if as they get to know each other more and know how to play off each other a little bit more, that's something that only gets better, right? So if healthy, Spence, which is when you're relying on a guy who is almost 41 and a guy who we know has question marks about his day-to-day routine, his, let's say, motivation or dedication to basketball outside of the actual hoops part, that is a question you can still ask. But if those two are healthy and we are entering the postseason, especially if they have home court and maybe a top 2 seed in the West, I wouldn't count them out, to say the least.
Every possession ends with a good shot when those two are on the floor. I mean, I watched the Clippers game, and just like every other player on the floor, not named Luka and LeBron, if you're in the right spot, you're just going to get an open shot. I would be concerned with starting Jackson Hayes and having Alex Len as your backup. Jokic is going to go for $1 million. But it looks really dangerous, man, when those two are right, which is not a surprise. All right, that will do it. Don't forget, coming up on the other side, it is the Utah Men's Coaches Show. Bill Riley, interim head coach Josh Eilert. Porter, what comes our way on a Tuesday edition of the program?
On a Tuesday edition of The Drive, Spence, we'll cover all of our bases, but zero in on some hoops as well. Tim McMahon for your NBA Daily Assist. It looks like we'll chat with our friend Tony Jones on a Tuesday as well. Aaron Falk of the Salt Lake Tribune. Haven't spoken with Aaron for quite some time, so it'll be good to catch up with him. And then Josh Furlong's weekly hit, giving us the latest on the Utes. Lady Utes, obviously a big win, and Josh Eilert in his first weekend as the Utes head coach. Gets a W over ASU.
There you go. So join us for a Tuesday drive. With that, we'll say goodnight. Very special thank you to Tom Haberstroh, Brian Dunseth, Bill Riley, and Sam Monson. Kind of jumped around, did a little bit of everything as we like to do on the program. If you missed any of it, you can go to the website, which is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. ESPN 700 app is available in the App Store, the Google Play Store. Then finally, for what we do in our space for 4 hours every afternoon, become a subscriber, a supporter, a follower, whatever they call it on your preferred podcasting app. We're there. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. Just do a search, hit the follow button, the subscribe button, leave a rating and a review. If you give us all the stars and say nice things, it actually does help. Reporter, I'm Spence saying goodnight. Enjoy your Monday evening. Utah Men's Coaches Show. Coming up on the other side. Talk to you tomorrow right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN Radio Network.